Chapter 638. The Lady Obsidian Heavy Sword had appeared in this world almost at the same time as Dugu Chobai. The second year after the Obsidian Heavy Sword had been found by humans, Dugu Chobai's name had started to spread. Hence, there was a saying that the Obsidian Heavy Sword had brought Dugu Chobai to this world. However, what people did not understand was that although Dugu Chobai was a flood-level Yuan Ku that was on par with Jendi, his strongest Lady Obsidian Heavy Sword was only a famous sword. That was something that people could not understand. Logically, even if Dugu Chobai's sword was not the Lady Emperor sword, it should be the Lady Fairy sword. However, the reality was that the Obsidian Heavy Sword was only a famous sword. What was even more unbelievable was the Obsidian Heavy Sword skills. That was because the 4 skills of the Obsidian Heavy Sword were all passive skills. There was not a single active skill. Martial skill, Obsidian Heavy Sword. The weight of the Obsidian Heavy Sword ignores the strengthening effect of the Lady Sword's body. Basic skill, Edgeless Heavy Sword. The Obsidian Heavy Sword has a 30% chance to cause dizziness. However, it is unable to cause bleeding or slashing effects. Passive skill, Great Ingenuity. The Obsidian Heavy Sword has a chance to break the opponent's weapon, depending on the quality of the opponent's weapon. Advanced skill, Nothing Can Stop. The Obsidian Heavy Sword can absorb the durability of the opponent's weapon to recover the energy of its own personal shield. Ultimate skill, Invincible Technique. The Obsidian Heavy Sword's attack has a sure hit effect. It cannot be missed, but it can be blocked. Those were the 4 skills of the Obsidian Heavy Sword. All of them were passive skills. There was not a single active skill. This meant that when the Obsidian Heavy Sword was used in battle, it would completely rely on the wielder's sword skills. There were no active skills that could be used. If it was in the hands of an ordinary wielder, this sword would be a piece of trash. Due to the unique martial characteristics of the recondite iron heavy sword, even an Emperor sword wielder would find it extremely strenuous to wield it. A wielder who was not a sword master would not be able to wield such a heavy sword. Even if they only held it in their hands and waved it, they would feel weak in their limbs. They would instantly lose their ability to fight due to the exhaustion of their physical strength. However, in the hands of a sword owner like Guhan, the Obsidian Heavy Sword was an absolute godly weapon. As long as they were good at using the passive skills, a sword owner with excellent sword skills could even use the Obsidian Heavy Sword to fight an opponent that was 3 to 4 times stronger than them. If this sword was in Guhan's hands, Guhan would be Guhan. He was confident that he could even fight the U-class Yuan Ku alone. Guhan Wood's sword was a sword that Obsidian Black Sword Long Yi could sword. Black, Heavy Sword God. He as the sword class sword. I don't know if everyone still remembers that the Heavenly Sword has such a title. It is known as the #1 sword mistress in the treasured sword tier. Similarly, among the famous sword ladies, Recondite Steel Heavy Sword was known as the #1 sword lady in famous sword rank. The Obsidian Heavy Sword's sword lady was taught by Dugu Chobai. According to some sword owners who had fought with Dugu Chobai, the Obsidian Heavy Sword's sword skills were 40% of Dugu Chobai's. What did that mean? Because of the Obsidian Heavy Sword, there was no sword class first sword lady in the entire spirit sword level. There was no sword lady whose sword skills were a match for the Obsidian Heavy Sword. Therefore, as long as the wielder could synchronize with the Obsidian Heavy Sword, they could leave the battle to the Obsidian Heavy Sword. They could just find a place to hide. Therefore, even though the Obsidian Heavy Sword didn't have any active skills, it was still the 3rd sword class sword. If it wasn't for the first 2 being too abnormal, the Obsidian Heavy Sword would be the deserving first place. When Guhan saw the Obsidian Heavy Sword being released in front of him and becoming the Obsidian Heavy Sword lady, Guhan couldn't help but feel excited. He even started to eagerly look forward to the battle. Because the Obsidian Heavy Sword had 40% of Dugu Chobai's sword skills, could Guhan find a trace of Dugu Chobai in the Obsidian Heavy Sword? Should he have a battle that transcended time and space with this sword devil? The Obsidian Heavy Sword lady wasn't a beautiful sword lady. In fact, it could be said that she was a little ugly. Because her skin was dark, her body was thick, and her muscles were bulging all over her body. If she covered her face, she would look like a strong man. However, Guhan could feel a strong power contained in her bulging muscles. "Who are you?" To Guhan's surprise, before the battle even began, the obsidian heavy sword lady suddenly put down the sword in her hand and looked at Guhan in confusion. I am military governor, a player. I will also be your next opponent. Guhan answered seriously. No, you are not a simple player. You have a familiar scent on you, but I can't recall it. The obsidian heavy sword lady thought for a moment but couldn't recall anything. In the end, she simply grinned and said, Fine, it seems that my main body is missing some memories. Summon your sword lady. Let's fight to our heart's content. No need. I will fight like this. Guhan raised the heaven-relieving sword in his hand and made an inviting gesture. Heh! You are a sword master, and you are using heavenly. The recondite steel heavy sword recognized heavenly sword's origins with a single glance, and it could not help but laugh out loud. Heavenly sword, that stupid woman, has finally appeared again. Among the famed swords, only that stupid woman's sword technique can exchange a few blows with me. Hey, military governor, are you sure you want to fight me? I advise you to let Heavenly come out. That way, you will lose slower. Something happened to Heavenly, so she can't be released right now. Let me fight you, obsidian heavy sword. Guhan said proudly. In that case, I will make my move. After saying that, the lady of the obsidian iron heavy sword, who had been talking to Ji Han just a moment ago, instantly sped up like a sports car. She charged at the commander and swung her sword at Ji Han's head. It was worth mentioning that the obsidian heavy sword was different from ordinary swords. Ordinary swords wished that their tip and blade were as sharp as possible. The sharper the sword, the better. That way, they could cut through iron like it was mud and easily cut through the enemy's defense. However, the obsidian heavy sword didn't have any sharpness. The edges on both sides of the sword were blunt, and the tip was round like a hemisphere. This was the origin of the obsidian heavy sword's basic skill. Such a sword couldn't cause cutting damage to the enemy. It was more like a sledgehammer that dealt heavy damage. Therefore, the obsidian heavy sword's first move was to smash Guhan's head. Clang! The heaven-relieving sword blocked the obsidian heavy sword's blade and forcefully blocked the shorekill attack. You brat! You have some skills. No wonder you dare to fight me. The obsidian heavy sword let out a pleasantly surprised voice as if she was celebrating that she had such an opponent. However, as she was cheering, the obsidian heavy sword didn't stop. Instead, it smashed at Guhan even more fiercely. Clang! 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 A back-and-forth battle unfolded on the stage. Both sides were absolute experts in swordsmanship, and they were both famed swordsmen. Moreover, both of them were using broad-minded swordsmanship styles. Every time their swords clashed, sparks would fly, and the sparks were as bright as fireworks in the dark night. After watching for less than half a minute, all the spectators felt as if their eyes were about to break. The two of them were too fast. Before the spectators could react to the first slash, the next 3 slashes were already over. The spectators had to move their eyeballs hundreds of times every minute just to keep up with the swords of both sides. In the spectators' eyes, the military governor and the obsidian heavy sword seemed to have turned into 2 super-armored bumper cars. They kept smashing into each other, and the ground trembled along with their collisions. My eyes! Finally, one of the spectators couldn't take it anymore. His eyeballs instantly turned bloodshot, and there was even a trace of blood at the corner of his eye. The spectator quickly covered his eyes, and it took him quite some time to recover. Fortunately, this was a game, and his eyes could recover automatically. If this was the real world, the spectator would have to lie in the hospital for a night. The spectator who covered his eyes was only a signal. More and more spectators covered their eyes. Their eyes might not be bleeding, but they couldn't hold on any longer. They had to close their eyes and rest for a while. You're amazing, much more amazing than I imagined. After a clash, the obsidian heavy sword took the initiative to retreat a dozen steps, widening the distance between her and Guhan. Logically speaking, the best decision for Guhan to catch up to her and suppress her attacks was to prevent her from leaving the battle. However, Guhan didn't do so. Instead, he allowed her to widen the distance between them and regroup. You're amazing. I need to catch my breath. The obsidian heavy sword's muscles were drenched in sweat. This was the reason why she had to leave the battle. She needed to recover some stamina. Similarly, on the other side, Guhan was also panting heavily, and his face was flushed. The obsidian heavy sword's swordsmanship isn't bad either. I, the military governor, have learned a lot from it. Guhan wasn't referring to this guy. The obsidian heavy sword's fighting style was very barbaric and reckless. It was a fighting style that Guhan had never encountered before. This was the first time Guhan had fought with such a fighting style. He had indeed learned a lot from the battle and could improve his swordsmanship a little more. No, you're better than me. I've shed 230 drops of sweat, but your clothes don't even have a speck of sweat. It's hard to believe that you're only using a treasured sword level idiot like the heavenly sword. The obsidian heavy sword panted again. I'm not the type to be stubborn. My swordsmanship isn't as good as yours. I admit defeat. What did she mean? She admitted defeat just like that. Upon hearing the obsidian heavy sword's words, Guhan couldn't understand. She had, at most, exhausted a little more stamina. She was far from admitting defeat. However, Dragon Feather, who had been hiding at the side, revealed a smile. The obsidian heavy sword was getting serious. My swordsmanship lost, but that doesn't mean I've lost. The obsidian heavy sword raised her sword again. Now, I'll show you the swordsmanship left behind by Master Solitary. Chapter 639. It turned out the obsidian heavy sword wasn't using Dugu Chobai's sword technique. A hint of understanding flashed through Ji Yuhan's mind. It was no wonder that even though the lady of the recondite steel heavy sword's sword technique was powerful, Ji Yuhan was still unable to feel astonished. Guhan instinctively felt that this wasn't the sword technique of the sword devil, Dugu Chobai. Although there weren't many people who could defeat this sword technique, they weren't the only ones. Watch carefully. I'll let you witness the unparalleled 9 swords of Dugu Chobai, sword breaker. The lady of obsidian heavy sword sneered and attacked again. The 9 swords of Dugu Chobai was Dugu Chobai's unique sword technique. It was known as the unparalleled sword technique that could break all weapons in the world. What a fast sword! Guhan saw a moving sword light from the corner of his eye. His heart went cold, and he swung the heavenly sword in his hand horizontally. Clang! As expected, Guhan blocked the lady of obsidian heavy sword's sword. Although it was faster than the previous sword technique, there didn't seem to be anything special about it. Could this be the unparalleled 9 swords of Dugu Chobai? Guhan had just thought of that when he felt a violent impact on his waist. His entire body was sent flying, and he landed heavily on the ground. The energy of the protective shield on his body was reduced by 1/5. Good. Dragon Feather clenched his fist. This was the first time Guhan had been hit since the start of the competition. F***CK. The military governor has been hit. What just happened? The spectators in the stands were in an uproar. They couldn't believe that the military governor, who had blocked every sword attack perfectly, couldn't block this one. He was sent flying like a burlap sack. How did this happen? Ji Yuhan, who crawled up from the ground, was also stunned. He had clearly blocked that sword just now, so why did it still hit him in the end? Guhan couldn't figure out what had happened. Do you still have the chance to be stunned? Lady Steel Heavy Sword's attack arrived again. This time, Guhan didn't choose to block it. Instead, he rolled backward a few times and dodged the sword. Before he could understand the solitary 9 swords, Guhan didn't plan on clashing with Lady Steel Heavy Sword. His personal shield couldn't withstand a few of Lady Steel Heavy Sword's swords. Can you dodge it? The lady of recondite steel heavy sword sneered. She turned into a phantom, and the sky was instantly filled with sword shadows. No one knew which sword strike would be the deadliest. It seems like I've fallen into a disadvantage. Guhan smiled wryly. This solitary 9 swords was indeed powerful. Its pure swordsmanship might be even more powerful than the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. No wonder the sword demon, Dugu Chobai, could use the solitary 9 swords to defeat all the heroes in the world. And so, a scene that the players had never imagined appeared on the battlefield. The powerful military governor was like a rabbit being chased around by the lady of recondite steel heavy sword. It was as if the lady of recondite steel heavy sword wanted nothing more than to grow 6 or 7 legs. The whole situation was extremely pathetic. Oh well, I can't lose here. If I use sword in the field from the 9 swords of mysterious heaven, I should be able to break her sword momentum, Guhan thought to himself as he ran. Recondite steel heavy sword was not an undefeatable sword maiden. Based on the records of past battles, humans already knew how to deal with recondite steel heavy sword, which was a sword maiden with such strong sword techniques, and that was to use endless long-range attacks to drown the sword maiden. It wasn't that Guhan couldn't do this. As long as he used sword in the field first and then sword in the abyss, Guhan was 100% confident that he could defeat recondite steel heavy sword here. Sword in the field was a spell that could destroy the ground. It could turn the ground into a deep stone forest. In such an environment, the might of 9 swords beyond the swords would definitely be limited, and the lady of recondite steel heavy sword would also be limited. At that moment, as long as the military governor released hundreds of sword chis from sword in the abyss, Guhan believed that even the lady of recondite steel heavy sword would definitely die under his sword chis. But was such a victory really the one that Guhan wanted? This was not a victory of sword techniques, but a victory of sword chis. Guhan did not use the sword techniques that he was proud of to defeat his opponent. In this way, Guhan's confidence in his swordsmanship would be greatly affected. Once a swordsmanship expert like Guhan lost confidence in his swordsmanship and started to avoid using swordsmanship to defeat his opponent, it would undoubtedly create a huge inner demon in his heart. This inner demon might cause Guhan to be unable to improve his swordsmanship for the rest of his life. On the contrary, if Guhan could defeat the solitary 9 swords here, then his swordsmanship would definitely usher in a huge improvement. This improvement might allow Guhan's swordsmanship to enter a whole new realm. Fine, I'll just lose here. As he was fleeing, Guhan gritted his teeth and suddenly turned around. He did not flee. Instead, his heaven-reliant sword transformed into several tens of afterimages that resembled lotus flowers and attacked the lady of mysterious steel heavy sword. Interesting. You're finally not running anymore? The lady of obsidian heavy sword cheered and clashed with Guhan again. However, this time, it was the military governor's turn to attack while the lady of mysterious steel heavy sword defended. In an instant, Guhan felt as though he had entered a completely selfless state. All the swordsmanship, experience, and techniques he had learned in his life had been mixed together, turning into a swordsmanship that even the military governor did not know what. He attacked the lady of mysterious steel heavy sword all at once. What the hell is this? What a mess! The lady of mysterious steel heavy sword let out a strange cry. Guhan's swordsmanship was too strange. She had never seen such a swordsmanship before. Even the sword breaker style, which was said to be able to break all the swordsmanship in the world, did not seem to be very useful in her hands. Ripples suddenly appeared on her protective shield from Guhan's attacks. As a result, the spectators covered their eyes again. Their eyes were unable to endure such an exciting battle. They could only keep rubbing their eyes in an attempt to ease the bloodshot exhaustion. When their eyes recovered, they realized that the two of them were no longer fighting. Instead, they were standing facing each other. Is the match over? Who won? A spectator anxiously asked the spectator next to him. Don't ask me. I don't know either. Didn't you see me rubbing my eyes just now? The spectator mumbled. Stop arguing. No one has lost yet, but it's going to be over soon. Just look at the screen and you'll know. It looks like the military governor is really going to fail miserably this time, another player said in a miserable tone. Another player said miserably. He had bought a 200,000 yuan lottery ticket, and it seemed like he was going to lose it all. The obsidian heavy sword was too powerful. It was ridiculously powerful. The two players quickly looked at the big screen. At that moment, the big screen was displaying the energy values of their opponent's personal shields. The lady of obsidian heavy sword's personal shield still had around 90% energy left. On the other side, the military governor's personal shield had fallen to 3%. With just one more gentle poke, the military governor would be defeated in an instant. More importantly, the heaven-reliant sword in the military governor's hand was in a mess. The obsidian heavy sword had the effect of destroying other weapons. As a result, even though the personal shield of the heaven-reliant sword was still intact, the blade was already full of cracks. If the battle continued, the sword might very well shatter. You are very powerful. Your future is limitless. However, you are no match for me right now. You should just admit defeat. If the heaven-reliant sword breaks, it will be troublesome to repair it. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword advised with good intentions. However, when her words reached Guhan's ears, they sounded unusually harsh. You're right. The heaven-reliant sword can't continue fighting. Guhan nodded and sheathed the heaven-reliant sword. The personal shield on Guhan's body also disappeared. What did that mean? Could it be that the military governor had already decided to admit defeat? The spectators on the stands were in an uproar, but they immediately calmed down. Everyone could see that the admiral had used his swordsmanship to the extreme just now. Losing here was something that could not be helped. It was a pity that they had lost their bets. No. The military governor didn't admit defeat. A player suddenly shouted. At that moment, the personal shield on the surface of the military governor's body lit up again. This was a brand new personal shield with 100% energy. Oh! The military governor has switched to a sword mistress. The players muttered. He can't use the surpassing king's sword, so he can only use the ancient sword mistress. Speaking of which, what was the name of the military governor's ancient sword mistress? I don't have any recollection of it. Do you still want to fight? This sword isn't as durable as the heavenly sword. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword saw that Guhan hadn't given up. Instead, he took out an ancient sword mistress. Moreover, this ancient sword mistress looked unfamiliar. She had never seen the Obsidian Heavy Sword before. She guessed that it was a trash ancient sword mistress that was ranked near the bottom. The quality of this sword mistress was not on the same level as the heaven-reliant sword. The heaven-reliant sword had been on the verge of breaking after fighting her for a few minutes, let alone this low-grade ancient sword mistress. She is the Qingpin sword. Don't underestimate her. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Guhan smiled. He gently stroked the blade of the Qingpin sword. Then, he lightly flicked the blade with 2 fingers. The Qingpin sword instantly let out a crisp sword cry. Good sword. Hearing this sword cry, the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword's expression suddenly darkened. As a sword mistress, she was also someone who understood swords. When she heard this sword cry, she knew that the Qingpin sword's material was not ordinary. Please advise me. Guhan, who had always been bowed to by his opponents, suddenly bowed to the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword. Moreover, it was a 120-degree bow. What is this guy doing? Before the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword could figure out what was going on, the military governor took the initiative to attack. Who cares? I just need to defeat him. When they clashed again, the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword suddenly realized that her opponent's swordsmanship was different from before. Previously, her opponent had relied on his Anata state to confuse her with a hodgepodge of swordsmanship. Now, however, her opponent's swordsmanship became clear once again. And this clear swordsmanship made the Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword's hair stand on end. 9 solitary swords. When did you learn the 9 solitary swords? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword forcefully blasted Guhan away. Then, she stared at Guhan in astonishment. The swordsmanship Guhan had used just now was none other than her 9 solitary swords. Chapter 640. I'm sorry. I realized that my sword technique can't defeat the solitary 9 swords, so I had no choice but to learn it. Guhan replied. You managed to learn the solitary 9 swords in such a short time? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword blinked. She then said something that made the audience burst out laughing. Are you kidding me? I wouldn't dare. I only learned 80% of it. It can't be considered a complete mastery. Guhan replied seriously. Without the solitary 9 swords sword technique's general formula, it'll be useless even if you learn it 100%. Take this. The Lady of Recondite Steel Heavy Sword spat and once again clashed with Ji Han. Originally, the lady had planned to use the real solitary 9 swords to teach this stinking brat a lesson for secretly learning the solitary 9 swords. However, the lady almost vomited blood. This time, Guhan's sword path changed again. The solitary 9 swords was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it was the hodgepodge of sword techniques that caught her off guard. This time, however, there was an additional material in the hodgepodge of sword techniques. The military governor had thrown the solitary 9 swords into the mix. He had mixed the solitary 9 swords with his original sword techniques and turned it into an even more chaotic hodgepodge of sword techniques. In the face of such a terrifying hodgepodge of sword techniques, the lady of recondite steel heavysword suddenly felt powerless. This time, her solitary 9 swords was no longer useful. No matter how she used the broken sword styles techniques, there was nothing she could do against the extremely chaotic hodgepodge of sword techniques. What was even more terrifying was that his hodgepodge of sword techniques was still growing. There was something that the lady couldn't explain. It was faintly discernible within the hodgepodge of sword techniques. When the soup and impurities in the hodgepodge of sword techniques were all removed, only God knew what kind of terrifying monster would emerge from it. After exchanging over 100 moves, even Lady Steel Heavysword began to feel exhausted. This was the first time the Lady Steel Heavysword's heavy attribute had displayed its effects. Lady Steel Heavysword could no longer use her arms properly. On the contrary, even though the military governor was drenched in sweat and his body was drenched, his swordsmanship was getting more and more straightforward. What a pity. It would be great if there were a few thousand more moves. Suddenly, Guhan let out a sigh. The Qingpin sword in his hand strangely flicked up and struck the Lady of Black Iron Heavy Sword's wrist, causing her to stumble. The Lady of Black Iron Heavy Sword actually slipped out of her hand and fell to the ground. You lost. Guhan pulled back his Qingpin sword. Although the Obsidian Heavy Sword Empress's personal shield was still there, once the sword left his hand, he had already lost in a spar between sword wielders. I lost. The Dark Iron Heavy Sword Empress nodded and smiled bitterly. You bad guy, you actually used me to practice your sword. You can't bully people like that. Guhan didn't say anything. This kind of thing was not easy to answer. Forget it. Let me ask you, what sword technique did you use just now? Does it have a name? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword asked again. It doesn't have a name. Guhan shook his head. It's a sword technique that I combined all that I've learned in my life during a critical moment. It doesn't have a name yet. Haha, since it doesn't have a name, how about I give you one? The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword chuckled. How about we call it the Great Chowder Sword Technique? The Great Chowder Sword Technique? Cough, cough. Although a certain someone had been using this name to describe it, it was really inelegant to use it on a sword technique. Good name. To her surprise, Guhan nodded in agreement. In fact, I also feel that it's like a great chowder. Sigh, even a great chowder was able to defeat my solitary 9 swords. I wonder how terrifying it will be when it's refined and revealed its true form. The Lady of Obsidian Heavy Sword sighed. Do your best. When you throw away all the miscellaneous parts of the great chowder, it'll be time for this sword technique to reveal its extraordinary power. I look forward to that day. I hope that you'll be able to create it while you're still alive. I'll probably live longer than you. I definitely will. When that time comes, I'll use it to fight you again, Guhan said proudly. This hodgepodge sword technique was a pure sword technique. It was formed by Ji Yuhan's fusion of everything he had learned in his life, as well as the solitary 9 swords that he had stolen from the Lady of Recondite Steel Heavy Sword. Once the essence within was fused and extracted, it would definitely become an extremely terrifying sword technique. TSK, I won't fight you anymore. My solitary 9 swords can't defeat you. However, don't think that the solitary 9 swords is like this. When I tell others that I'm 40% as good as Master Solitary, I'm actually just teasing them. I'm only 10% as good as him at most. When you meet Master Dugu and the solitary 9 swords in his hands, you will understand how desperate the real solitary 9 swords can make you. If it's possible, I'll definitely fight the sword devil, Guhan said calmly. Then, he sheathed the Qingpin sword in his scabbard. Hey, I almost forgot to ask. What's the origin of this ancient sword lady of yours? You've exchanged hundreds of moves with me, but there isn't even a crack on it. Even a spirit sword lady can't do this. It was clear that the Lady of Obsidian Heavysword was very curious about the Qingpin sword. I also want to know the answer to your question. Guhan's answer was equivalent to not answering her. Hey, stingy. The Lady of Obsidian Heavysword threw these words at him and walked over to Long Yu, who looked calm. I've lost. Do you want to fight again? No matter how one listened to the Lady of Obsidian Heavysword's words, they sounded like thorns. No, I'm not his match. At least not now. Long Yu shook his head and answered honestly. Yeah, at least you know your limits. Let me tell you, you'll only be like this for the rest of your life. You can't surpass him. It's best if you don't continue fighting him because you won't even be able to see where he is in the future. That's all. I'm tired. Goodbye. After saying so, the Lady of Obsidian Heavysword returned to its scabbard. At the same time, Long Yu clenched his fists. Although the host felt that Long Yu wouldn't continue fighting, due to the rules, he still had to confirm it. Mr. Long Yu, do you still want to fight? I admit defeat. After saying these words, Dragon Feather disappeared from the stage. Once a player admitted defeat, they could leave as they pleased. Dragon Feather did not wish to remain on this stage for even a second longer than he had to. Our Mr. Long Yu still has urgent matters to attend to. In any case, let us congratulate the military governor for another victory. Everyone, let's cheer. The host shouted loudly, and the entire grandstand immediately burst into a tsunami of cheers. Military governor, military governor, military governor. The atmosphere in the arena was close to going crazy. After Jiyu Jin Jendi, this was the second sword wielder to defeat the entire famed sword group. This is great. My money is safe. The player who bought 200,000 said with tears in his eyes. Brother, did you bet that the military governor could defeat the number one sword wielder? The player next to him suddenly asked. What's wrong? The player asked cautiously. Nothing. I just want to remind you not to be too proud now. If the military governor could defeat the spirit sword wielder, then your money would be wasted. The player said with a smile. Let me ask you. Do you still want the military governor to win? The player was stunned for a moment. Then, he hammered the player's leg. Who cares? If the military governor wins, I'm happy. Money is nothing. Congratulations, Mr. Military Governor. You have defeated Mr. Long Yu. Now, you have inherited Mr. Long Yu's right to challenge. You have the right to challenge the higher-level players of the Spirit Sword Group. Do you still want to continue the challenge? The host asked as he raised the microphone to Guhan's mouth. Of course, Guhan replied without hesitation. Then, Mr. Military Governor, you now have a total of 40,000 quarks of Sword Element Oral Solution, and the reward for the first place of the Spirit Sword Group is 80,000 quarks of Sword Element Oral Solution. How much Sword Element Oral Solution do you want to take out as your wager? The host asked again. After defeating the number one sword wielder, Guhan had the opportunity to choose his wager number again. If he wanted to fight with the number one sword wielder, then Guhan had to take out 20,000 quarks of Sword Element Oral Solution. However, compared with the beginning, this was already an excellent result. Previously, if Guhan wanted to win, he had to take out all of his Sword Element Oral Solution. Now, he only needed to take out half of it. Even if he lost, there would still be 20,000 quarks left, which was an excellent thing. Therefore, Guhan gave such an answer. 38,000. Guhan actually gave such an inexplicable number. This was almost all of Guhan's Sword Element Oral Solution. This. Mr. Military Governor, you only need 20,000 quarks. You don't need 38,000. The host kindly reminded him. He thought that Guhan had fought too many fights, so his mind was a little confused, and he miscalculated the number of sword element he needed. I know, it's 38,000. I won't change it. Guhan repeated his answer again. Okay. Anyway, this thing belonged to the military governor. If the military governor didn't feel distressed, the host had no reason to feel distressed for the military governor. However, he was very curious in his heart. Why did the military governor have to spend almost all of his sword element oral solution? Obviously, 20,000 quarks was enough. I don't know if Mr. Military Governor can explain the reason behind this. I'm asking this on behalf of the audience. The host knew that the other audience members must be very curious about this question, so he pulled the audience up, for fear that Guhan would not be willing to answer. Because if it's 38,000, I can earn more sword element oral solution. Guhan's answer was very simple. Let's calculate it. If Guhan took out 20,000 quarks of sword element oral solution, then his opponents would be the top 128 plus top 16 plus first place. If he won all 3 battles, then Guhan could get a total of 140,000 quarks of sword element oral solution 2 plus 4 plus 8. If Guhan took out 38,000 quarks of sword element oral solution, then according to the principle of choosing the lower if it's insufficient, then his opponents would be the top 32 plus second place plus first place. He could get a total of 35,000 plus 70,000 plus 80,000 quarks of sword element oral solution. Mr. Military Governor, you're really good at math. The host did not know what to say. Chapter 641. In the spectator stand, there was one person who had been sitting there silently. No matter how the military governor performed, whether he was in a crisis or one, she always looked very calm. Unfortunately, her constantly rising and falling chest still betrayed her, showing that her heart was not calm. Although he always knew that his master was very awesome, but when he really saw the military governor's battle, Lu Shihua then knew how big the gap between his thoughts and reality was. His master probably couldn't be described as awesome, he was simply a dragon. More importantly, the tall figure of the military governor gave her a faint impulse to follow behind him. Even if she didn't become a sword bearer in the end, it would be great if she could become the disciple of the military governor. Alright, Lu Shihua temporarily put his thoughts aside. Right now, it was almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Guhan hadn't even eaten a bite since the beginning. However, the competition wouldn't be suspended just because the military governor didn't eat. The military governor immediately welcomed his next opponent, a spirit sword level swordbearer from the top 32. After drawing the number, this spirit sword level swordbearer decisively accepted the invitation, unlike the other famous swordbearers who had various reasons to refuse. If they found a reason to not dare to fight a swordbearer who only used a sword maiden, then all the spirit sword level swordbearers didn't need to live anymore. Mr. Feng Xiaohanshi, I don't know if you have anything to say about this challenge to our audience. The host once again asked. Of course. Feng Xiaohanshi snatched the host's microphone and placed it on the side. She then looked at Guhan's position. I want to say, Mr. Military Governor, I, Feng Xiaohanshi, deeply admire your ability. If you were a spirit sword level swordbearer, I'm afraid even 10 Feng Xiaohanshi together wouldn't be your opponent. But now, it's better for you to stop. The spirit sword group isn't a place for you right now. In the face of Feng Xiaohanshi's provocation, Guhan didn't answer. He just smiled, and the competition began again. Release, Madame Shu's sword. At the beginning of the battle, Feng Xiaohanshi directly released her sword maiden. Her speed was so fast that it didn't even take a second. She probably learned from Ming Yu's previous lesson and knew that without the protection of the sword maiden, the sword bearer itself was the biggest weakness. The only way for Guhan was to break the sword bearer's personal shield. Feng Xiaohanshi's thinking was not bad. With Guhan's current strength, directly fighting against a spirit sword maiden was indeed very strenuous, and it was also an unwise move. Moreover, the opponent wasn't an ordinary spirit sword level swordbearer, but one of the top 32 spirit sword level experts. None of these opponents were weak. Their sword element was probably no less than 800,000. Even if this kind of sword maiden just brushed against his body, his personal shield would immediately shatter. This also meant that from now on, Guhan couldn't be hit by the opponent. Even if it was just once, Guhan would definitely lose. This was because the attack power of a spirit sword level swordbearer wasn't something that the current Guhan could withstand. Unless Guhan took out the Yu King's sword, if he was touched even a little, he would die. At the same time, the entire arena was silent. No one dared to make a sound. Everyone was staring at the battlefield, staring at the two people on the battlefield. It had been a whole 60 years. The last time they saw a battle between a treasure sword level and a spirit sword level was 60 years ago. And the audience from 60 years ago had basically all died. In other words, many people would only be able to see this once in their lifetime. If they wanted to see a battle between a treasure sword level and a spirit sword level again, who knew how many 60 years they would have to wait? Feng Xiaohanqi's spirit sword Maiden was Madame Shu's sword. Hearing this name, everyone might not be familiar with it. They didn't learn this in history class. Was this sword Madame Shu's sword? Whose wife was Madame Shu? Did she find a beautiful one? In fact, Madame Shu wasn't a madam, but a man through and through. Surnamed Shu, named Madam, he was a world-famous swordsmith. This sword was forged by him, so it was called Madame Shu's sword. Of course, Madame Shu's sword should actually be called Madame Shu's dagger. However, since Yuchang's sword was called a sword, then Madame Shu's dagger was classified as a sword, so there was nothing wrong with naming it Madame Shu's sword. As a dagger forged by a human, it was able to surpass the position of a spirit sword, surpassing the fish intestine sword, which was also a dagger, by a whole 2 grades. It must have had an extremely amazing story and fame. Only by gathering thousands of years of fame could an ordinary dagger become a high-level spirit sword maiden. The so-called dagger was naturally used for assassination. And to gather enough fame to become a spirit sword maiden, the target of the assassination must be extremely distinguished. At the very least, it must be the first person in history. Writing up to this point, everyone should have reacted. That's right, this Madame Shu's dagger was the dagger that Jing Ku used to assassinate the King of Qin. Jing Ku's assassination of the King of Qin was the first assassination in history, and as a tool, Madame Shu's dagger naturally became the #1 dagger in the world. Unless there was a second Qin Shi Huang, no other dagger could surpass the fame of Madame Shu's dagger. The freed Madame Shu's dagger was a rather beautiful woman. She only had a few pieces of black cloth covering her important parts. The rest of her plump body and skin were exposed. There were all kinds of strange tattoos on her body, making her look like a terrifying female beast. Hide. After Madame Shu appeared, her hand lightly touched Feng Xiaohanqi's body. Feng Xiaohanqi and Feng Xiaohanqi disappeared into the air together with Madame Shu. This was the passive skill of Madame Shu's sword. Madame Shu was one of the few killing path sword maidens that could hide together with her sword wielder. If an ordinary sword wielder wanted to hide, they had to hold the hilt of their own sword maiden. However, Madame Shu's sword could make her sword wielder invisible at will. This undoubtedly allowed the sword wielder to enter an extremely safe environment. Unless one had the ability to see through invisibility, as long as Feng Xiaohanqi didn't move, Guhan wouldn't be able to find his position. Invisibility? My first opponent is actually Madame Shu's sword. I'm starting to regret it. Before Guhan could finish his words, he immediately rolled to the left. At the same time, he used Heavenly Sword to block his ear and his whole body was sent flying. At the place where Jiyu Han had been sent flying, Mrs. Shu's figure flashed past and disappeared again. It seemed that Madame Shu had launched a surprise attack on Guhan just now. Unfortunately, Guhan's quick reaction was able to dodge it. The flying military governor didn't have time to stabilize his body and rolled to the side again. Heavenly Sword fiercely struck the ground and blocked Madame Shu's sword once again. Madame Shu's figure appeared again. This time, she didn't quickly disappear. Instead, she looked at Guhan in surprise before disappearing into the darkness and preparing for the next surprise attack. This process was repeated several times. Every time, Guhan was able to predict Madame Shu's attack in advance and perfectly blocked the opponent's attack. However, after blocking a few times, Guhan's wrist was completely swollen. Although the gap in swordsmanship could be made up for with skills, the solid impact from blocking was something that Guhan's body, which was strengthened by a sword, couldn't handle. This was a confrontation with a difference of 2 realms. I must find Feng Xiaohanqi's position. It won't be fun to waste time with Madame Shu. Her attacks are too terrifying, Guhan thought to himself. However, Feng Xiaohanqi hid too well and didn't move at all. This made it impossible for Guhan to determine his position based on the subtle movements. There's no other way. This is the only way. Guhan jumped up from the ground and stabbed Heavenly Sword into the ground. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword in the field. In the end, Guhan still used the 9 swords of mysterious heaven. Suddenly, the entire ground cracked and turned into a stone forest. Wow, what kind of move is this? This is the first time I've seen it. When the audience saw the sudden appearance of the stone forest, they could no longer restrain their excitement. The originally quiet environment suddenly became noisy. Ultimate move. This must be the ultimate move that the military governor has been preparing for a long time. Oh my god, a spiritual sword-level sword wielder is really powerful. In an instant, he forced the military governor to use his ultimate move. A player said loudly. The surrounding people nodded, indicating that this was indeed the military governor's ultimate move. How could they know that this was actually one of the 9 sword moves of the military governor? When the ordinary players saw the military governor's ultimate move, they were extremely excited. However, the expert players expressed that they didn't understand. This move looked very powerful and could even change the terrain, but in fact, it didn't have much effect on Madame Shu. With Madame Shu's movement technique, even if she was on the tip of a needle, she would still be able to stand steadily. Needless to say, this stone forest wouldn't have much effect on Madame Shu. Instead, it was the military governor's body that was affected. He felt that this move was completely unnecessary. Of course, the military governor wasn't doing this superfluous move. He only had one goal, and that was to find Feng Xiaohanqi's position. However, as long as Feng Xiaohanqi didn't move, the military governor wouldn't be able to find Feng Xiaohanqi's position based on the changes in the airflow. Therefore, he had to make Feng Xiaohanqi move in order to find Feng Xiaohanqi's position. The moment the stone forest was formed, Guhan noticed a subtle movement in the northwest corner of the stone forest. This was the sound of something falling to the ground. Found you. Guhan's figure instantly disappeared and appeared at the location where the sound came from. The heavenly sword immediately slashed at a stone pillar behind him. When the blade of the sword was still a certain distance away from the stone pillar, it seemed to be blocked by something. Immediately, Feng Xiaohanqi's figure appeared. Guhan's guess was right. Feng Xiaohanqi was hiding here. Found you. Guhan let out a sigh of relief. His body immediately transformed into his hero form, transforming into his divine general form. Then, he injected all the sword elements in his hand into the heavenly sword. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, sword battling dome. This was Guhan's strongest single-target killer move that was about to slash Feng Xiaohanqi's body. This was the strongest attack that the military governor could use. The heavenly sword's hero form had an attack that ignored 10% of defense. In addition to the strongest single-target killer move, sword battling dome, it should be able to break Feng Xiaohanqi's personal shield. After all, the Sword Lady of Massacre's personal shield was famous for being thin. Victory or defeat depended on this move. Chapter 642. You're too cunning. Windy Hanshi looked at the shattered shield on her body, and her face was filled with unspeakable bitterness. Because of the special skill of Madame Shu's sword, Windy Hanshi was quite assured of her safety. She felt that it was impossible for the military governor to find her, so she relaxed her vigilance. As a result, she didn't expect that the military governor would suddenly use the terrain skill to force her to expose her whereabouts, and in the end, she was defeated. The whole battle didn't even last for 3 minutes, and she was defeated. Thinking of this, Windy Hanshi's face became even more miserable. This time, she would become the laughingstock of the spirit sword level sword holders, which was really a bit too bad. The winner is Mr. Military Governor. The host announced the final result, and the surrounding stands instantly burst into the most violent cheers. Countless players used their throat-breaking voices to cheer for the military governor's victory. This was the strength of a sword-level sword holder defeating a famous sword-level sword holder. The record of Sword Maiden online for 200 years was completely broken. Only God knew who would be able to do this next, and when would it be. However, very soon, a very dramatic moment appeared. When the large number of audience cheered halfway, their throats seemed to be strangled by something, and suddenly they couldn't make a sound. Immediately, many of the players' eyes were filled with hot tears. Heavens, I've thrown in all my savings, I don't have any left. I'm not convinced that I lost to you, I was too careless. After the battle ended, the stone forest of the arena once again returned to its original state. Feng Xiaohanshi grabbed onto the admiral's clothes and said unwillingly, "It's all over." Gu Han didn't say anything. Right now, whatever he said would probably be taken as a provocation by Windy Hanshi, so it was better to just shut up. As the saying goes, silence is golden. You listen to me. Suddenly, Windy Hanshi moved her mouth to the side of Gu Han's ear and whispered, "That liqueur guard, you understand now." Windy Hanshi hit the military governor's shoulder. "As long as you attack her weak point, I guarantee that she will definitely not be your opponent. Why are you telling me this?" Gu Han's expression was a little strange as he looked at Feng Xiaohanshi. What he had just told him was indeed very useful. If he could use it flexibly, he would definitely be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. However, that method was simply too shameful. Even if he won, it wouldn't feel much different from losing. Don't you understand? As long as the second place liqueur guard loses, everyone will naturally forget about me, the loser of the top 16. Ha ha ha. With that, Feng Xiaohanshi left the stage. It seemed like he did not wish to stay on this stage for even a moment longer. Liqueur guard was the second place in the Spirit Sword group, and also the opponent of the military governor in the second round of the Spirit Sword level competition. Because Gu Han was only in second place, Gu Han didn't need to draw lots. The host directly contacted liqueur guard. The other party couldn't refuse, nor did she have the face to refuse. This female sword wielder with a frosty face finally appeared in front of the military governor. Liqueur guard had an extremely beautiful long silver hair. Whether it was her facial features or skin, they were all the purest European appearance. From her appearance, one could guess that liqueur guard should be one of the rare pureblood Europeans. Liqueur guard had such unique pureblood European characteristics in the game, so she must also be a pureblood European in reality. Although the system could change one's appearance, it was only a Photoshop modification on the original foundation. Therefore, the most basic appearance characteristics of pureblood Europeans wouldn't change. At the same time, because the majority of the sword bearers after the apocalypse were of Chinese descent, and the base city of China was also the first to be established, about 70% of the survivors were Chinese. Therefore, the theory of Chinese superiority had never disappeared in the past 1,000 years. It had become a tacit statement that everyone agreed on. Therefore, most Europeans hoped that they could be of mixed blood with Chinese. This way, more sword bearers could be born. Therefore, in reality, pureblood Europeans were extremely rare. Only a few European families that intermarried with each other maintained a certain level of pure blood. Apart from them, it was very difficult to find such a person. However, liqueur guard's attire was a little strange. She was actually wearing a full set of half-body armor, like a majestic female knight of Ling. What left a deep impression on Gu Han was the pair of terrifying murder weapons on liqueur guard's chest. Gu Han swore to the heavens that these were definitely the biggest murder weapons he had ever seen. Gu Han had never seen such terrifying murder weapons. Abgdefgik. God, it felt like Mount Tai was nothing more than this. Hello. Gu Han took the initiative to greet liqueur guard. This was standard etiquette. Mph, don't show me any goodwill. I won't hold back. Perhaps there was a hole in liqueur guard's brain. When she saw Gu Han's polite nod, she took it as a sign of goodwill. Then, she pointed the sword in her hand at Gu Han's nose. You listen to me. I will not allow the glory of a spirit sword knight to fall in the hands of a mere sword knight like you. After that, liqueur guard smashed her knight's sword on the ground and let out a loud bang. The pair of astonishing oppies on her upper body shook like two bouncing balls. While almost all the audience's attention was attracted by the murder weapons on liqueur guard's chest, Gu Han's attention was focused on the sword in liqueur guard's hand. This was a very strange sword. Because one part of it was a wide knight's sword, but the other end of the hilt was not as simple as it seemed. Instead, there was a steel flagpole extending from the hilt. Since it was a flagpole, naturally, there was a flag hanging on the other end. On the flag, there was a picture of two angels holding lilies. This sword could no longer be called a sword. It was more appropriate to call it a sword flag. This was because it was a combination of a sword and a flag. On one side was a sword, and on the other side was a high-spirited flag. At first glance, Guhan knew the name of this sword. There was only one sword in the world that was so unique and had a flag as one. That was the sacred sword of Jean. The sacred sword of Jean was the sword of Saint Joan of Arc. As for the story of Saint Joan of Arc, it was unknown to humans after the apocalypse. The sword mistress herself was never willing to mention the story of Saint Joan of Arc to anyone. Therefore, it became an eternal secret that lingered in the hearts of the world. Hey! Shameless villain, where are you looking at? You lecher. This pure-blooded European spoke Chinese fluently. This female knight probably saw the admiral staring at her without moving his eyes, so she naturally thought that her weapon had attracted his attention. She could not help but scold him. At the same time, she thought to herself, I thought this military governor was powerful. It turns out that he is also a shameless lecher. I must teach him a lesson later. Begin. The arena once again entered a combat-ready state. First, Le Courgard inserted her sacred sword of Jean deep into the ground. Immediately after, a dazzling light shone. The flag that was originally attached to the hilt was inserted into the ground, while the body of the sword was held in Le Courgard's hand. This Le Courgard did not summon the sacred sword of Jean. Instead, she held the sword by herself. Could it be that Le Courgard was also a sword mistress? Of course, Le Courgard was not a sword mistress. A sword mistress was not that worthless. The reason why Le Courgard fought with a sword like a sword mistress was because of the unique characteristic of the sacred sword of Jean. For some reason, the sacred sword of Jean would never reveal its true form in front of the world unless it was forced to do so by its wielder. She would rather exist in the form of a sword in this world. The sacred sword of Jean had a special ability, which was to project its own swordsmanship onto its wielder. Regardless of whether the wielder had a foundation in swordsmanship or not, as long as the wielder held the sacred sword of Jean, they could naturally master the swordsmanship of the sacred sword of Jean and fight like a sword mistress. Therefore, this characteristic of the sacred sword of Jean was unique. It could forcibly create a sword mistress. Obviously, this was the case for Le Courgard. Die, you big pervert. After Le Courgard held the sacred sword of Jean, her entire body became a little frenzied. She raised the sacred sword of Jean and slashed at Guhan. With a clang sound, Guhan blocked the sacred sword of Jean. However, the muscles on Guhan's arm involuntarily trembled the moment he blocked the attack. Le Courgard's strength was extremely terrifying. It was as if a few tons of iron hammer had smashed down. The moment he blocked the attack, Guhan felt as if his bones had cracked, giving off a heart-piercing pain. I heard that you relied on finding the hiding place of that trash, Feng Xiaohanshi, to defeat him. The moment the two of them blocked each other, Le Courgard said to Guhan, you might be able to deal with this kind of fragile chicken, but you can't deal with me. I am the sword mistress, and the sword mistress is me. It is impossible for you to defeat me. Le Courgard was right. She was much more difficult to deal with than Feng Xiaohanshi. Guhan's fighting style of shaking off the sword mistress and bullying the wielder did not work on Le Courgard at all. This was because she was also a sword mistress. Moreover, her sword mistress was a royal way sword mistress, a royal way sword mistress with 3 basic attributes that were relatively average. After saying this, Le Courgard wanted to kick Guhan in the stomach, wanting to send him flying. However, she did not expect that Le Courgard's sword would miss. The military governor leaped into the air and jumped away. Chapter 643. Unable to land a kick on Guhan's body, Le Courgard was left in a rather sorry state. Feeling humiliated, Le Courgard's heart was filled with hatred. She continued to chase after the military governor. Having learned his lesson from the previous battle, Guhan didn't want to fight Le Courgard head-on. The woman's strength was too terrifying. His bones were aching, and facing her head-on wouldn't end well. As a result, Guhan decisively changed his fighting style. He began to play guerrilla warfare. This is a creative tactic created by the founding ancestor of the last dynasty before the Great Destruction. I don't need to explain it to you guys. It's to constantly harass Le Courgard, while Ji Han himself will never face Lecourgard head-on. For a moment, Lecourgard suddenly found herself in an extremely awkward situation. The military governor's movements were extremely slippery. Even though Lecourgard was 2 tiers higher than him, her sword couldn't even touch Gu Han's body. Gu Han evaded every single one of her attacks. Meanwhile, Gu Han took the opportunity to leave a mark on Lecourgard's body from time to time, dealing some damage. It was as if dripping water could pierce through a rock. Damn it, this isn't the honor of a knight. Come out and fight me for 300 round. Lecourgard said angrily. Her giant OP kept swaying along with her roar, mesmerizing the spectators. They wanted nothing more than to rush to Lecourgard's side and bury their heads in between the 2 giant OP. Your Majesty, slow down. Helplessly, Lecourgard returned to the flag she had planted. She grabbed the flagpole and yelled. Suddenly, the white flag turned blue. At the same time, Gu Han suddenly felt his feet sink. His movement speed was suddenly reduced by more than 5 times. This was the ultimate skill of the sacred sword of Jin, Glorious Flag Whisper. By changing the color of the flag, the battle flag can release different tactical effects. Red, Sovereign, Full Assault. All sword bearers within range have their attack power increased by 500% for 20 seconds. Blue, Sovereign Slow Deceleration. All enemies within range have their movement speed reduced by 500% for 20 seconds. Green, Sovereign, Fearless Protection. All sword wielders within range enter an invincible state, become immune to all attacks, and recover 1000 shield energy per second for 10 seconds. Cooldown, 10 minutes. In order to attack the military governor, Lecourgard went all out. She actually used Jean d'Arc's ultimate skill, Glorious Semaphore. This was an ultimate skill with a 10-minute cooldown. Lecourgard would not normally use it unless it was absolutely necessary. However, she had no choice but to use it. The military governor's movements were too cunning. If Lecourgard didn't use the Glorious Semaphore, she wouldn't even be able to touch the military governor's body. Lecourgard's thinking was simple. As long as the military governor's movement speed was reduced, he would not be able to dodge her attack. Moreover, the reduced movement speed would last for 20 seconds. This was enough time for her to slash the military governor 30 to 40 times. In fact, she didn't even need 30 to 40 strikes. At most, she would only need 3 strikes. Lecourgard was confident that she could destroy the military governor's shield. Go to hell, pervert! Lecourgard shouted as she charged at the motionless military governor. Gu Han smiled bitterly. Lecourgard's move was too ruthless. If he was a spirit sword tier swordbearer, even if his sword essence was 5 times stronger, he was confident that he could make a fool out of Lecourgard. However, he was only holding onto a sword now. It was impossible for him to dodge Lecourgard's attack within 20 seconds. There seemed to be no other way for him to block. Sigh, looks like I'll have to reveal the 9 swords of mysterious heaven again. Gu Han shook his head. He had already used the 9 swords of mysterious heaven twice before. If he used it again, it would definitely attract the attention of others. He didn't know if it would result in a bad outcome. However, there was no other way. If he didn't use it, Gu Han would really be defeated by Lecourgard. 9 swords of mysterious heaven, engraved sword. Gu Han had used this move in the Wudong Peak dungeon before. Generally speaking, only spirit sword tier swordbearers could fly in the air. However, Gu Han could indirectly achieve this through engraved sword. The reason for that was because sword practitioner's engrave was actually a sword controlling technique. Ji Han could control the heaven-reliant sword to fly freely in the sky, while Ji Han only needed to hold onto his own heaven-reliant sword to fly together with his sword mistress. So when Lecourgard charged at him aggressively and satisfyingly, Gu Han flew. He actually flew into the sky. F***CK. The military governor flew into the sky. He really flew into the sky. Lecourgard and all the other players stared at this scene with their mouths agape. They had thought of many ways that the military governor could deal with this desperate situation, but they never thought that the military governor would actually fly into the sky. Big brother, is my memory spoiled? Why do I remember that only spirit sword tier swordbearers can fly? Can sword bearers below spirit sword tier also fly? A player's mouth opened and closed like a dead fish. Don't ask me, my memory is spoiled too. This player's expression was also similar to that of a dead fish. Sigh, even if the military governor can fly, so can Lycurguard. The military governor still can't escape defeat. Another player said with a sigh. You don't know this, but the military governor really escaped this time. Lycurguard's ultimate move was wasted. The first player replied. Why? I've seen the flying speed of spirit sword tier sword bearers. This military governor is flying so slowly, he will definitely be caught by Lycurguard. This player asked in confusion. Someone who shouldn't be able to fly flew, so someone who can fly naturally can't fly. The military governor's flying speed was indeed very fast. He leisurely grabbed the heavenly sword in his hand and slowly floated into the sky, about the same speed as a hydrogen balloon. The flying speed of a normal spirit sword tier sword bearer was about the same as the flying speed of a wild goose. Catching a hydrogen balloon was really a very simple thing. However, the helpless thing was that Lycurguard could only stand on the ground and watch the military governor fly into the sky, because Lycurguard couldn't fly. As the saying goes, gain at the mulberry gourd, lose at the east corner. Where there is gain, there is loss. P.S. Well, in fact, it should be lost at the east corner, gain at the mulberry gourd. Everyone, don't get it wrong. In the book review section, people are saying that I'm teaching children bad things. Because of the characteristics of the sacred sword of Jean, Lycurguard obtained the ability of a swordmaster, but it also made her lose the ability to fly. No one knew why, but the sacred sword of Jean was one of the few spirit sword maidens who didn't have the ability to fly. Lycurguard could only watch the military governor fly in the sky and then forcibly drag on for 20 seconds before falling down from the sky. At this moment, Lycurguard's mood was exploding. She felt as if she was being ridiculed by the military governor. In fact, engraved swordsman was a skill that consumed a lot of sword essence. It consumed up to 500 quarks of sword essence per second, which was a whole 10,000 quarks of sword essence in 20 seconds, which was equivalent to 2/5 of the sword essence in Guhan's body. Therefore, Guhan couldn't stay in the air forever. When the buff ended, he immediately descended from the sky. More importantly, the sword essence in Guhan's body could only support the consumption of engraved swordsman for another 20 seconds at most. The cooldown time of Lycurguard's ultimate skill was 10 minutes. In other words, within 10 minutes, Guhan had to kill Lycurguard. Otherwise, he would be in big trouble. However, Lycurguard was indeed an extremely difficult swordsman to deal with. Originally, Guhan planned to rely on a sneak attack on the swordsman instead of fighting the sword maidens head-on, but it was completely ineffective against Lycurguard. Although Lycurguard's swordsmanship wasn't brilliant, it wasn't weak either. By relying on her overwhelming sword essence and strength, she could completely drag out the 10 minutes. Guhan had no other way to deal with her. Everything is for Europe. To make matters worse, Lycurguard's anger had completely erupted. She suddenly let out a loud roar and a hazy golden light appeared on her body. A pair of golden wings appeared on her back, making her look like an angel. This was the advanced skill of the sacred sword of Jean, Saintess Descent, transfers the power of the Saintess to Jean's body, greatly increasing Jean's agility. At the same time, she also gained the effect of Holy Flame. Attacks can burn the enemy's flesh and blood, dealing 1000 points of damage per second for 10 seconds. The damage can be stacked up to 5 times. Saintess Descent consumes 2000 quarks of sword essence per second. With the increase in agility, Lycurguard once again chased after Guhan and began to attack. This time, her speed was significantly increased. Guhan felt that it was difficult for him to dodge Lycurguard's attacks. If he tried to block, his bones wouldn't be able to withstand Lycurguard's strength. There were even a few times when Lycurguard's attacks almost grazed Guhan's body. If he was grazed by Lycurguard, it would be over for him. This was because the holy flame would immediately attach to Guhan's body. Right now, Guhan only had a total of 10,000 points of sword essence on his body. If the holy flame burned for 10 seconds, Guhan's body would be burned to a sliver of HP. There's no other way. Looks like I'll have to use the method that Wind Rider Hanshi mentioned. Although Guhan felt that this method was shameless, If he was really forced into a corner, he would not hesitate to use this method. In the next moment, the military governor once again dodged Lycurguard's attack in a somewhat awkward manner. He then casually swung the heaven-reliant sword at Lycurguard's body. As the most prominent part of Lycurguard's body was a certain large part, the heaven-reliant sword naturally landed on Lycurguard's monstrous weapon. There was nothing strange about it. However, the moment the heaven-reliant sword came into contact with Lycurguard's body, the originally aggressive Jean's sword of Jean's hand suddenly froze. She immediately raised her hand to protect her chest, not even bothering to attack Guhan. Chapter 644. Shameless. Pervert. Pervert. Lycurguard hugged her OP and glared at Guhan in embarrassment and anger. Her face was still flushed. How could you attack me here? Lycurguard's words stunned the male audience for a moment. Then, they all revealed a strange smile. This military governor was too much. How could he attack a girl's OP? Sigh, unfortunately, I didn't pay attention just now. It would be great if there was a replay. How would the military governor answer such an awkward question? The audience was looking forward to the military governor's answer. You're too arrogant. Guhan's answer was short and straightforward. The male audience nodded in agreement. It was indeed reasonable and convincing, but then again, the military governor's attack just now seemed to be unintentional. Did Lycurguard need to react so strongly? During a battle, swords and blades were silent. All that mattered was victory. It was normal for a situation like this to happen. It was common for other female sword wielders to encounter similar situations. Meanwhile, the female audience members secretly spat and called her a bitch. However, they were not calling her a bitch for Guhan, but for Lycurguard, who asked her to have a pair of OP that all women were envious of. She even shamelessly used them to seduce men. She was indeed a bitch. Those with big breasts were all bitches. Go to hell. Lycurguard was furious. She picked up Jeanne d'Arc's sword and began to attack the military governor like a storm. In her rage, Lycurguard's attack speed increased by a lot, surpassing her previous attack speed. This caused Guhan to be in an even more difficult situation. Therefore, intentionally or unintentionally, the heavenly sword collided with Jeanne d'Arc's lethal weapon. Lycurguard couldn't help but give up on her attack and protect her OP. You're doing it again? Lycurguard hugged her OP and was on the verge of tears. You're a pervert. Whatever you think. Guhan shrugged his shoulders, expressing his innocence. In the following battle, although Lycurguard was still furious, she became very cautious. While attacking, she used her left hand to shield her OP, ready to defend against any attack from the military governor. Unfortunately, Lycurguard's defense did not have any effect. On the contrary, because of her uncoordinated movements, her already flawed swordsmanship became even more flawed. This gave the military governor the opportunity to stab Oupai with his sword. Wow! This stab was different from the previous two. This time, Guhan obviously used a lot of strength. Lycurguard's reaction was even more peculiar. This time, she did not protect her OP. Instead, she squatted on the ground and 2 drops of tears flowed out of her eyes. She looked at Guhan resentfully. At this moment, even an idiot could tell that the military governor did not attack Lycurguard's OP by accident. He did it on purpose. Otherwise, how could he attack her OP when Lycurguard was guarding it to the death? Do you still dare to argue this time? You clearly did it on purpose. Lycurguard's face turned even redder. Her huge breasts could be seen trembling through the armor. Yes, I did it on purpose this time, Guhan admitted readily. Because I noticed that you cared about those 2 pieces of fat the last 2 times, so I tried to attack them. It was very effective. Military governor, you're awesome. Hearing Guhan's words, the male audience gave him a thumbs up. Perhaps they could secretly tease the alluring OP like the military governor. However, it was hard to find someone in this world who could admit that he did it on purpose in front of tens of millions of people. Moreover, he even explained the reason behind it with a straight face. Apart from the military governor, no one else in this world could do it. As for the female audience, they also felt very comfortable. The word fat was a great way to describe it. How appropriate. They were indeed 2 pieces of damned fat. Fat that was too oily even when frying oil. You. Lecourgard didn't know how to insult Guhan anymore. This girl, who had been determined to be a knight since she was young, was very fluent in Chinese. However, she didn't have a deep understanding of the traditional Chinese vocabulary. Other than pervert and pervert, she actually couldn't think of any other words. Lecourgard bravely stood up again and continued to attack Guhan. However, this time, her attack was completely different. Only her right hand was attacking, while her left hand was directly hugging her OP. In this way, Lecourgard didn't have any swordsmanship to speak of. Even if Guhan slowed down his speed by 2 times, she still wouldn't be able to touch Guhan's body. As a result, the one who was crazily attacking became Solid Han. In a second, as many as 7 to 8 swords landed on Lecourgard's body. Under the attack of Solid Han, this female contestant who was ranked number 2 in the spirit sword tier actually had the energy of her protective shield drop at a speed visible to the naked eye. And other than hugging onto her OP, she had no other way to deal with it. Very soon, Lecourgard's shield fell to less than 20%. Defeat was right in front of her eyes. Thinking that she was going to be humiliated by the military governor and also be defeated by the military governor, Lecourgard's heart was filled with despair. She decided to fight back with all her might and teach Guhan a harsh lesson. Lecourgard wasn't a brainless woman. She realized that because her performance was too useless, the military governor had already let down his guard against her. All his attention had shifted to attacking. This was a huge opportunity for her, a chance to turn defeat into victory. Now, when the shield was about to fall below the 10% threshold, Lecourgard swung the sacred sword of Jean in her hand. Using all her strength and technique, Lecourgard swung the sword in her hand at the military governor's neck. Lecourgard also activated her advanced skills and basic skills, instantly doubling her agility. I'll definitely hit. With this realization, Lecourgard used the most stunning sword move in her life. She imagined the scene of the military governor being cut in half by her sword, kneeling and begging for mercy. How strange. She had already cut him in half, so how could he still kneel and beg for mercy? Well, this wasn't a problem. Anyway, in Lecourgard's eyes, Guhan wouldn't be able to escape this sword. But in reality, how could an expert like the military governor not guard against the opponent's counterattack? Even a fool could guess that the opponent wouldn't be willing to accept defeat and would fight to the death. So, Guhan immediately leaped to the left. As long as he dodged this sword, Lecourgard would lose her momentum and lose for sure. But unexpectedly, Lecourgard suddenly lost her center of gravity and fell onto the military governor's sword. Lecourgard's full strength and the acceleration of gravity caused her OP to crash into Guhan's sword. Even though it was the soft OP that was directly hit, Guhan felt as if a small portion of his bones had been broken. The pain caused Guhan's eyes to twitch uncontrollably. If Guhan was in such a state, then Lecourgard was in a similar state. After suffering such a violent impact, her OP let out an extremely coquettish moan and fell heavily to the ground. Because it was falling with her chest down, after the OP hit the ground, Lecourgard's body bounced up like a bouncing ball. The voluptuous OP had amazing elasticity, causing Lecourgard's body to flip over and land on her back instead of her face. This elasticity. How good would it be if I could touch it? Seeing this scene, all the male audience members simultaneously swallowed their saliva in unison. They couldn't help but grasp the air as if they could feel the elasticity. After that, Lecourgard's video was intercepted and made into a GIF. It was circulated among countless players and was voted as one of the most alluring GIFs in history. Her name was passed down through the ages. Lecourgard, who was lying on the ground, didn't seem to have fainted. Instead, she let out soft moans. Guhan also noticed that there was a pool of water slowly flowing down from the beautiful female knight's lower body. Let me tell you, Lecourgard's weakness is her OP. Legend has it that if you touch her OP lightly, she won't be able to stand it. I'm risking my life to tell you this. You can't tell anyone that I told you this. Guhan recalled what Windy Hanshi had told him. Initially, he was still skeptical about it. However, now, Guhan was sure that Windy Hanshi wasn't exaggerating. Instead, she had shrunk down a lot. The sensitivity of Liquorguard's OP had reached a terrifying level. Guhan stepped between Liquorguard's legs to prevent the audience from seeing this scene. He then poked Liquorguard's face with his heaven-reliant sword. "Miss Liquorguard, do you still want to fight?" "You." Liquorguard opened her eyes and glared at Guhan fiercely. Just as she was about to say that she still wanted to fight, she immediately discovered that her lower body was cold. She also discovered that Guhan's foot was stepping on the pool of water. Her expression instantly became extremely strange. "Play by yourself. This old lady isn't going to play with you anymore." This old lady admits defeat. After Liquorguard finished speaking, she could no longer suppress her tears. She bawled and instantly disappeared from the arena. Very good, Guhan won again, although his method was a little despicable. "Mr. Military Governor, congratulations on winning this match." The host walked to Guhan's side with a smile that all men would understand. He bumped his shoulder. "Then, let us welcome your last opponent in the Spiritual Sword Group, the champion of the Spiritual Sword Group." Before the host could finish his words, there seemed to be some news coming from the communication device. Immediately, his expression stiffened, and he only recovered after a long time. "Dear audience, let me tell you a piece of unfortunate news. Just now, I've received the latest news. The champion of the Spiritual Sword Group died last night because of Yuan Ku's attack, F***CK. What the hell is this?" The audience looked at each other in dismay. Military Governor's opponent was gone just like that. Didn't that mean that Military Governor had directly obtained victory and was going to fight against an immortal sword-tier sword wielder? Chapter 645. While the audience was shocked by the fact that Guhan could go straight to the sword fairy level swordsman battle, in the official conference room, the 4 special planners had once again started a group meeting. 2 meetings for a player in one day was something that had never happened before. "Can we confirm that the number 1 spiritual sword level swordsman is dead?" One of the special planners touched his head and asked with a bitter smile. "It has been confirmed." This was personally confirmed by Her Excellency Tomono Kakaze. He died in a surprise attack by Yuan Ku at 2 o'clock this morning. One of the special planners replied. "How did he die? How did he die at this juncture?" This planner's smile became even more bitter. He was an outsider from Moscow, an ordinary person. Although the invasion of Moscow has subsided, there are still many Yuan Ku outside. The chairman of the Sword Council of Moscow took the risk to send people to restore the fields outside the city. In the end, the camp outside the city was attacked at night. When he was half awake, he probably thought that he was still a spiritual sword-level swordsman and wanted to go out to fight Yuan Ku. In the end, he was bitten to death by a tiger-level Yuan Ku. One of the special planners said with a bitter expression. This kind of thing had happened many times since the appearance of Sword Maiden online. Many ordinary people were experts in the game, but in reality, they forgot this point. Hence, all kinds of tragedies occurred. Alright, how this person died is not important. What's important is the opponent of the military governor. A special planner knocked on the table. How should we arrange this military governor now? Should we let the 3rd place fight him, or let him go straight to the sword fairy level battle? 3rd place. He even defeated the 2nd place, why would he fight the 3rd place? Another planner sneered. This is not in line with the rules at all. But the method he used to defeat the 2nd place was obviously a trick. The planner knocked on the table. He took advantage of the 2nd place's fatal weakness to win. He didn't use his true strength to defeat his opponent. I don't think he's a match for the 3rd place at all. The 3rd place can end his winning streak. Isn't winning by exploiting the opponent's weakness a victory? No matter what, a victory is a victory. We don't have the right to change the rules of the competition. There are only 2 choices now. Either we find a suitable opponent for military governor and let him go straight to the legend of the sword and fairy group. According to what you said, we only have one choice. If the 3rd place can't be a match for the military governor, where else can I find a match for the military governor? Then let the military governor ascend to the legend of the sword and fairy team. Seeing that the two special planners were about to get into an argument, the other two hurriedly pulled them back and sighed in their hearts. This military governor was really a scourge. Not only did he cause them to have 2 meetings a day, but he also caused the 2 gentle special planners to fight. Actually, I have an idea. Suddenly, a cute Loli's voice sounded in the conference room. The 4 special planners all stood up and saluted Tomono Kakaze, who suddenly appeared in front of them. After saluting, one of the special planners asked curiously, "What idea do you have, Mr. Tomono?" "It's not a good idea. Have you forgotten? In the legend of the sword and fairy group, there is a sword bearer who is not a sword and fairy level sword bearer. Isn't it perfect to let him fight?" Tomono Kakaze's words made everyone's eyes light up. That's right. How could they forget this person? Ladies and gentlemen, our officials have the latest evaluation results. After a decision, the officials have decided to continue the competition for the first place in the spiritual sword level. After a long period of silence, the host suddenly announced the result to all the gamers. Continue the competition? Who is the opponent? Where can we find another opponent for the military governor who surpasses the second place in the spiritual sword level? The audience looked at each other in dismay. They couldn't figure out how to continue the competition. After careful consideration by the officials, they have decided to let Sky Quake of the Sword and Fairy Group be the opponent of Mr. Military Governor. The host continued to announce. The audience immediately began to discuss it. Sky Quake, it's him. If it's him, then it's indeed reasonable. The players said one after another. Although Tianjun had been included in the legend of the Sword and Fairy Group, the debate about him had never stopped. This was because Tianjun could only be considered half a legend of the sword and fairy level swordsman. He had only joined the legend of the Sword and Fairy Group because he had unsuccessfully appealed to the officials. This student Sky Quake could be considered a famous player in the world. He only had 600,000 sword elements, which was far from the minimum requirement of 1 million quarks of sword elements for a sword and fairy level swordbearer. However, he still had his own sword and fairy level swordbearer, the ancestral dragon sword. It was said that the ancestral dragon sword was made from the dragon sword of the ancestral dragon. It had the powerful power of the desolate level Yuan Ku ancestral dragon. It was a sword and fairy level sword that could only be synchronized by humans with dragon bloodline. It sounded similar to Lu Shihua's Angel series swordbearer. However, the ancestral dragon sword was not a set like the Angel series swordbearer. There was only one ancestral dragon sword. However, the ancestral dragon sword had another characteristic, which was that it could be used at a lower level. As long as the synchronizer's dragon bloodline was rich enough, it could reduce the sword elements needed for synchronization. It was said that in reality, there was once a sword bearer of the ancestral dragon sword. When he was synchronized, he was only a sword bearer of the famous sword level. Naturally, the ancestral dragon bloodline in his body was very rich. The fact that this student Sky Quake could synchronize the ancestral dragon sword at the spiritual sword level was not a small piece of news. It had been talked about by the players for a long time. What made this student Sky Quake even more famous was that after he succeeded in synchronizing the ancestral dragon sword, he tried to apply to participate in the battle of the spiritual sword group as a sword bearer of the spiritual sword level. The reason was very good. It was because his sword elements were not up to the standard of a sword bearer of the fairy level. If this guy was allowed to participate in the battle of the spiritual sword group with the sword bearer of the fairy level, there was almost no suspense in the first place of the spiritual sword group. Therefore, after the officials considered it again and again, they decisively rejected his request and threw him into the fairy level. In the end, this player filed a complaint 5 to 6 times. He even posted a post on the forum, condemning the game officials for neglecting the rules and violating the rules. Unexpectedly, when the matter was completely exposed, all the players who knew about this matter scolded Sky Quake and praised the game officials for being fair and objective. As a result, Sky Quake had no choice but to participate in the battle of the fairy level. Then, he was defeated in the first round and was almost in the last place. Now, letting Skyquake become the opponent of the military governor would perfectly solve all the problems. First of all, Skyquake's strength was undoubtedly stronger than the second place in the spiritual sword group. Moreover, because of his own particularity, it was reasonable for him to be in the spiritual sword group. In addition, almost all the special planners hated this shameless Skyquake to the extreme. Therefore, they simply threw Skyquake in front of the military governor and let him be the opponent of the military governor in the last battle of the spiritual sword group. However, Guhan didn't know about Skyquake, so the host explained the reason for choosing Skyquake as the opponent of the military governor. After listening, Guhan frowned, thought for a while, and asked the host, since he is using the sword bearer of the fairy level, may I ask if I can use the Yu King sword? Use the Yu King Go Gen sword. The host was stunned by the question. According to Guhan's previous oath, he should not use the sword bearer of the famous sword bearer in the spiritual sword group. But now, Guhan's opponent inexplicably became a sword bearer with the sword bearer of the immortal sword bearer, but the group still remained in the spiritual sword group. This was indeed a difficult question to answer. Helplessly, the host could only report this question to the official. This time, the official reply was very fast. It was just 2 words, agreed. Since the military governor's side was settled, the host immediately contacted Skyquake's communication device. As soon as the other party heard about this matter, he immediately agreed. After a while, a man with strange bones appeared on the arena. It was indeed not wrong to say that he had strange bones, because this person was extremely thin, so thin that his whole body looked like a water chestnut. It was really the best description of a bag of bones. Mr. Military Governor, I, Skyquake, pay my respects to you. Although this Skyquake was a little thinner, he looked very polite. As soon as they met, he saluted Guhan. However, the haze between his eyebrows never dissipated, which made Guhan very uncomfortable. Guhan snorted in response to Skyquake's salute. Skyquake smiled slightly and was not angry. 1 minute later, the match officially began. Ha ha ha. My good grandson, didn't you say that the battle would continue for a while? Why is it starting now? A sword lady with red hair and scales on her body came out from the ancestral dragon sword. As soon as she appeared on the stage, she announced her existence with a harsh laughter. The madness of the ancestral dragon was unparalleled in the world. It was not surprising that the ancestral dragon sword had such a character. Reporting to Grandma Ancestral Dragon, there is a sword bearer of the famous sword level who dares to challenge you. I can't refuse, so I can only let Grandma Ancestral Dragon accept the challenge. Skyquake actually called his own sword Lady Grandma. This was the first time. However, after thinking about it carefully, if Skyquake really had the bloodline of the Ancestral Dragon, it was not a big deal to call the Ancestral Dragon Grandma. What do you think I, the Ancestral Dragon, am? How dare you let a piece of trash challenge me? Oh. I'm so angry. The Ancestral Dragon let out an angry roar. Speaking of which, this Ancestral Dragon did not seem to have a high IQ. He was so easily agitated. Ji Han was not surprised by this, because the Ancestral Dragon sword was made from the dragon horn of the Ancestral Dragon. Although the dragon horn was a sharp weapon used to attack and was the best material for making a sword, it was normal for a solid object like this to be brainless. Once it was angry, it would shout and kill. Chapter 646. In the face of the Ancestral Dragon's furious roar, the hearts of the audience stirred, and they all lamented for Ji Han. Ancestral Dragon's sword might not have a brain, but it was shockingly powerful. More importantly, it was a true celestial sword maiden. Guhan had no chance of winning against a celestial sword wielder. Just the celestial sword wielder's ability to control the void was not something that the military governor could handle. As long as the opponent opened the void door, she could send the military governor into the void. Without even fighting, the military governor would lose. Hence, in the eyes of the majority of the audience, the admiral's defeat was already set in stone. No matter how he carried on, he would only struggle for a while. It was impossible for the admiral to defeat the Ancestral Dragon sword, a sword lady of the immortal sword rank. Otherwise, the majority of the audience's worldview would be completely refreshed. Yu King. Ji Han drew out the King of Yu's Gojen sword, which he had been waiting for a long time, from its sheath. This sword, which had appeared for a brief moment, once again appeared in front of the audience. Despicable brat, you actually planned to use a sword maiden made of ordinary iron to fight me? When Ancestral Dragon saw Yu King go Jen, she couldn't help but get even angrier. In her eyes, other than sword ladies who were also immortal sword ladies, all sword ladies who dared to appear before her were lowly things. Ancestral Dragon Horn Strike. Ancestral Dragon Sword used its basic technique in anger. It planned to defeat this sword maiden that dared to provoke it immediately and make her pay for her lowly actions. Ancestral Dragon Horn Strike was the basic technique of the Ancestral Dragon Sword. The attack contained Ancestral Dragon's domineering aura. It could deal 200% to 1000% damage to all sword maidens that were lower in rank than the user. This move was simply a sure-kill technique for low-grade immortal sword ladies or low-grade universal sword silhouettes. It would deal at least 200% damage to opponents who were of a lower rank than the user. If a spirit sword lady were to be hit by this attack, she would probably lose 1/5 of her shield. If a famed sword lady were to be hit by this attack, it would probably be game over. Therefore, Ancestral Dragon was very confident that under his attack, this ordinary iron thing would definitely be destroyed by him. The only way for Guhan to win was to escape. Using speed to escape Ancestral Dragon's attack was the only way out. However, Ancestral Dragon's opponent was the military governor. This person's strength could not be calculated by common sense. Facing such an attack, Guhan actually raised the Yu King Gojen sword and planned to use it to block the Ancestral Dragon sword. Humph, you're seeking death. Ancestral Dragon snorted in disdain. She didn't attack the inspector's body. Instead, she slashed her Ancestral Dragon sword at the cold Yu King Gojen sword. She planned to cut the sword in half. Clang. The two swords collided with each other. Ji Han's sword flew dozens of meters away at the moment of impact and fell to the ground. This showed how terrifying the Ancestral Dragon sword was. The Ancestral Dragon sword suddenly realized that although the Admiral had been sent flying by it and looked rather pathetic, he had been constantly adjusting his landing posture while he was flying so that he could land in the best way. The real damage he suffered was not high. More importantly, the Yu King Gojen sword was not broken by it. Instead, it emitted a dark light. This ordinary iron isn't damage. Ancestral Dragon revealed a suspicious expression. Could it be that this sword isn't made of ordinary iron? Of course this sword isn't made of ordinary iron. Guhan stood up from the ground and patted the dust off his body. Even a 3-year-old knows that the Yu King Gojen sword is made of bronze. This isn't an iron sword, it's a bronze sword. Ancestral Dragon's face turned ashen. She seemed to feel that the audience around her was laughing at her. Ancestral Dragon Horn Strike. Flustered and exasperated, she continued to use basic skills to attack the military governor. However, this seemed to be a repeat of the previous attack. Although the military governor was sent flying by the Ancestral Dragon, the military governor didn't actually suffer much damage. Yu King Gojen sword didn't seem to be damaged at all. Yu King Gojen sword is really a famous sword rank sword maiden? Seeing this scene, the audience was speechless. The Ancestral Dragon sword was not only a sword lady of the immortal sword rank, it was also a famous tyrannical sword lady among the sword ladies of the immortal sword rank. It took pleasure in slicing the opponent into two. Even if it was a sword lady of the spiritual sword rank, when they met the Ancestral Dragon sword, they would usually be sliced into two within a few moves. Needless to say, for a sword lady of the famous sword rank like the Yu Wang Gojen, it was already a miracle that she could not survive the first move. To be able to survive the second move was already a miracle. As for now, blocking more than 10 strikes from the Ancestral Dragon without a trace of injury, this couldn't be described as a miracle anymore. Could it be that the Yu King Gojen sword is different from the information? She's not made of bronze, but of some extremely precious material. Seeing this, the audience started to wonder about the material of the Yu King Gojen sword. Only this could explain why the Yu-King didn't have a single crack when facing the ancestral dragon's attack. When did I become so strong? Not only did the audience not understand, even the Yu-King himself didn't understand what had happened to him. The Yu-King knew his body well. His sword was indeed made of bronze. No matter what, it couldn't be a match for the ancestral dragon sword made of rare materials like the ancestral dragon horn. When he blocked the first strike, he thought he was going to break. He even blamed Guhan for being heartless and unscrupulous. Even now, the Yu-King was still confused. He couldn't understand why he could face the ancestral dragon head-on. The Yu-King's figure was enchanting and elegant. This was the first time the military governor had released his sword Maiden. Before this, the military governor had always fought as the sword master. Why did he suddenly release the Yu-King Gojen sword? Could it be that the military governor planned to let the sword Maiden fight herself? That's right. It seems that before entering the competition, the military governor did something strange to my sword scar. Suddenly, the Yu-King remembered something that happened before the battle started. There were still 10 minutes before the battle started, but Guhan took the Juzi sword that had just been synchronized and ran into a small room with him. He didn't know what strange thing he did to the sword scar in his Zifu. After that, the Yu-King felt that there was a different and indescribable feeling in his body, as if he was connected to something. However, the competition was about to start, and the moment Guhan finished, he hurried to the battlefield. Then, there were endless battles. The Yu-King didn't even have the chance to ask and gradually forgot about it. Only now did the Yu-King suddenly realize that Guhan must have done something to him at that time. What did you do to me? Taking advantage of the gap in the battle, the Yu-King asked Guhan. I fused your power with the power of the Juzi sword. Guhan waved his hand and was sent flying by the ancestral dragon again. The fusion that Guhan mentioned was actually using the yin-yang sword art on the Juzi sword and the Yu-King Gojen sword, making the Juzi sword and the Yu-King sword become one, just like the Duyu sword and the heavenly sword. Although on the surface, Guhan was only using the Yu-King Gojen sword to fight, in reality, the power of the Juzi sword had already fused into the Yu-King Gojen sword's body. The attributes and characteristics of the two sword maidens were intertwined. But even if I fuse with a famed sword maiden, I can't block the ancestral dragon sword's attack. The Yu-King still didn't understand after hearing Guhan's explanation. However, Guhan didn't directly answer the Yu-King's question. Instead, he sent the attribute map of the Juzi sword into the Yu-King's mind. Juzi sword material, Fusang wood origin, innate, spring and autumn times unique, realm, famed sword rarity, 9th grade sword Dao, demonic Dao characteristic, Juzi sword doesn't have any emotions. Any spiritual type skills have no effect on Juzi sword. Awaken, awakened form, sword wielder, military governor deep sword mark, not deep damage, sword maiden form 1. 52 sword form 1. 52 defense, sword maiden form 2. 88 sword form 2. 88 agility, sword maiden form 0. 41 sword form 0. 41 protective shield reset time, 360 seconds. Durability, 100% synchronization and coordination sword element requirement, 10,000 synchronization and coordination time, 10 minutes initial sword mark engraving. After the initial sword mark is engraved, sword wielder's sword element points will be increased by 10,000 points. Sword mark contract. After synchronization, the sword wielder and the Juzi sword will have the characteristic of being sharp. When the Juzi sword is in sword form, the Juzi sword will never break from attacks below flood level Yuan Ku. Basic skill Ancestor of Mo. Within 20 seconds, for every demonic sword maiden within range, the Juzi sword's attributes will be increased by 10% to 60%. Maximum of 20. Cooldown time, 1 minute. Passive skill Ancestor of Technology. All scientific products can automatically repair themselves, 20% every 10 seconds. Advanced skill Benevolent Non-Offensive. The Juzi sword can make an opponent enter a benevolent state, losing the desire to attack all surrounding enemies. Depending on the enemy's level and the sword element of the sword wielder, lasts from 1 second to permanent. Cooldown time, 10 minutes. Ultimate skill, Mechanical Holy Beast. The Juicy Sword can randomly summon a mechanical black tortoise, mechanical baihu, mechanical vermilion bird, and mechanical azure dragon. The mechanical black tortoise has 10 times the defensive energy of the Juicy Sword and can absorb all damage received by the sword wielder. The mechanical baihu has 10 times the attack power of the Juicy Sword and has a guaranteed hit effect. The mechanical vermilion bird has 10 times the agility of the Juicy Sword and also has an area of effect fire attack skill. The mechanical azure dragon has 3 times the attributes of the Juicy Sword and can tear through the void and banish the opponent into the void. Swordmark Restraint, Demonic Juicy. When fighting with a demonic sword maiden or under the same sword wielder, all the attributes of a demonic sword maiden are increased by 100%. Confucian Nemesis. When fighting with a Confucian sword maiden or under the same sword wielder, all the attributes of a Confucian sword maiden are decreased by 100%. Fusang Mythology. When fighting with a Fusang sword maiden or under the same sword wielder, all the attributes of a Fusang sword maiden are increased by 100%. Chapter 647. These are the stats of a famous sword grade sword lady. After seeing Juicy Sword's stats, King Yu nearly spat out blood. If this was the stats of a famous sword grade sword lady, then not only would the famous sword grade sword lady not be able to live, even the spiritual sword grade sword lady would not be able to live unless they were in the top 10. The template of the 3 basic attributes of the Juicy Sword was completely the attribute template of a top-notch spirit sword maiden. Not only did the damage ratio break through 1, but the protection ratio actually broke through 2. The attribute template of the Yu King Gojian sword also broke through 1, reaching 1.25. The other stats were all below 1. What did this mean? This meant that 1 quark of Jiyu Han's sword essence could produce an attack of 1.52 points and a shield of 2.88 points. When Yu Wang and Juicy were added together, Jiyu Han's shield's energy had already reached 76,000 points. When Jiyu Han held Heavenly Sword, his shield's energy was only slightly more than 10,000 points. It had increased his shield's energy by 7.5 times. What was more terrifying was Juicy Sword's basic skill. It was even scarier than her ultimate skill. Everyone might not understand that each demonic sword lady could increase all stats by 10% to 60%, but in detail, if there was an ancient demonic sword grade sword lady, Juicy Sword stats would increase by 10%. Treasured sword grade would increase by 20%, famous sword grade would increase by 30%, spirit sword grade would increase by 40%, immortal sword grade would increase by 50%, and emperor sword grade would increase by 60%. Moreover, it could stack up to 20 demonic sword maidens. Even if 20 demonic sword maidens were at the same level as the Juicy Sword, all of the Juicy Sword's attributes would instantly increase by 6 times, and the impenetrable cold shield's energy would instantly increase to 450,000 energy points. It could also be used for 20 seconds every minute. This skill was truly heaven-defying. No wonder Jiyu Han was able to use King Yu and the ancestral dragon sword to resist. It turned out that the power of the Juicy Sword was hidden by his side. Moreover, the attribute of the Juicy Sword that could not be destroyed under the Monarch Sword was added to his body, so his body was unharmed. Thinking about it, King Yu suddenly felt that this indestructible stat was the most overpowered stat of Juicy Sword. What did this mean? This meant that after the Juicy Sword's personal shield was broken, its durability would not drop by even 1% when facing an attack from an opponent below Imperial Sword level. For a peerless sword master like Jiyu Han, this was the most suitable attribute. This way, he could use the Juicy Sword to fight with any opponent without worry. As long as his swordsmanship was high enough, the enemy would not be able to attack him. The Juicy Sword would be a super divine weapon that would never break. Jiyu Han would not have to worry about the sword lady's body being damaged in battle. He could fight without any worries, just like when he was fighting with the ancestral dragon sword. Did you see Juicy Sword's stats so you dared to fight an immortal sword level sword wielder? King Yu asked Guhan secretly. Guhan blinked. From the lottery ticket that Guhan had bought, it could be seen that Guhan had bet on being number 1 in the spirit sword level. This meant that his inner limit was at most to defeat number 1 in the spirit sword level. He didn't even think about fighting an immortal sword-level sword wielder. However, when he synchronized the juicy sword and saw its attributes, he immediately told the others that he would not use a famed sword-grade sword lady under the celestial sword tier. It was because the attributes of the juicy sword were so heaven-defying that after being enhanced by the yin-yang sword art, Ji Yuhan actually dared to arm wrestle with the celestial sword lady. Ignoring everything else, just based on this unbreakable stat, Guhan dared to fight an immortal sword-level sword lady with his swordsmanship. Of course, Guhan also knew that the gap between him and an immortal sword-level sword wielder was too big. His chances of winning were still very slim. As long as the immortal sword-level sword wielder was shameless enough to hide in the void and attack Guhan through the void, Guhan would have no chance of winning. Hiding in the void was not stealth. After all, stealth was still in this space. Guhan could feel the opponent's murderous intent and subtle sounds to determine the opponent's location. But if he hid in the void, if the opponent put a knife to his neck, Guhan wouldn't be able to sense it at all. Unless Guhan could become a spirit sword-level sword wielder and have some void perception ability, he wouldn't be able to predict the attack from the void. Originally, Guhan's plan was to spend a little sword essence oral solution to fight 300 rounds with the immortal sword-level sword wielder, absorb their experience, and further improve his strength. Then, he would surrender and end this challenge. However, the appearance of the ancestral dragon sword gave Guhan a reason to continue fighting. This was because Tianjin didn't have 1 million quarks of sword essence. Although he had synchronized with the immortal sword-level sword lady, he also didn't have the ability to enter the void. Even the ancestral dragon couldn't enter the void. This gave Guhan an excellent opportunity. For Guhan, an immortal sword-level sword wielder without the ability to enter the void was just a little more difficult to deal with than a spirit sword-level sword wielder. Logically speaking, the swordsmanship of the ancestral dragon sword was not very powerful. It could even be said that it was a little bad. After all, the ancestral dragon had used his own body to fight his enemies all his life. As for the swords invented by humans, the ancestral dragon sword itself didn't care about them at all. This led to the ancestral dragon sword's swordsmanship being terrible. He only knew the most basic movements such as swinging, chopping, slashing, stabbing, and flicking. There was no difference between him and a newbie who had practiced swordsmanship for 1 or 2 years. With this kind of swordsmanship, Guhan could abuse it however he wanted. However, the ancestral dragon's physical fitness was too strong. In terms of pure strength and speed, he was much stronger than Guhan. There was once a martial arts expert who said that 1 part of speed was equivalent to 3 parts of swordsmanship. In other words, as long as you were fast enough, you could defeat all swordsmanship. This was the situation that Guhan was facing. Ancestral dragon sword swordsmanship was terrible, but his extremely fast speed caused Guhan to repeatedly parry and be sent flying. Unfortunately, because the juicy sword had just been synchronized, there was no deep sword mark at all. Therefore, other than the basic skills, the other skills were not activated. Otherwise, if Guhan used the ultimate skill of the juicy sword and borrowed the power of the 4 sacred beasts, he might be able to find an opportunity to counterattack. Guhan could only resist and could not find an opportunity to counterattack. On the other side, the ancestral dragon sword, which had a violent nature, became even more violent. 10 minutes had passed, but it still did not win against a small famed sword wielder. This was a great humiliation. It's all this stupid sword's fault. Why do I have to use a sword? Although the ancestral dragon was a sword mistress, she did not like swords. Otherwise, she would have learned some decent swordsmanship after fighting for more than 1,000 years. The ancestral dragon hated swordsmanship very much. She preferred to fight with the body of a dragon. Therefore, the ancestral dragon took a step back and gave up on attacking. She went to Tianjin, who was watching from the side. She grabbed Tianjin's neck and roared, "My good grandson, listen to me. I want to transform into the ancestral dragon's true body." When Tianjin heard the name of the ancestral dragon's true body, his legs turned to jelly. His eyes and nose squeezed together. He forced a smile and said, "Grandma ancestral dragon, my sword essence has not reached 1 million quarks, so I can't leave a deep sword mark. I can't use my ultimate skill to let you transform into the ancestral dragon's true body. I see that you have suppressed the military governor. As long as you continue fighting, you will definitely win. Why do you need the ancestral dragon's true body? Ch, I want your ancestral dragon's true body. Why are you talking so much nonsense? Can't you use the ancestral dragon's true body without 1 million quarks? Condense the true dragon's blood yourself. Otherwise, don't blame me for taking it myself, the ancestral dragon scolded. Great-grandmother, I'm begging you. I'll lose 300,000 quarks of sword essence for every drop of true dragon blood. I'm begging you. I've saved for 10 years to accumulate 300,000 quarks of sword essence. Great-grandmother, Skyquake begged as tears streamed down his face. Slap. The ancestral dragon slapped Tianjin's face and kicked him to the ground. You useless thing. It's just 300,000 quarks. Great-grandmother will help you get them in half a year. If you don't force the true dragon's blood out today, don't expect me to fight for you for the rest of your life. Do you understand? Yes. Tianjin was helpless. In the face of the ancestral dragon's threat, Tianjin really had no ability to resist. His current strength was completely supported by the ancestral dragon sword. If the ancestral dragon sword didn't come out to fight, Tianjin would be completely finished. Helpless, Tianjin could only tearfully spend 300,000 quarks to force out a drop of true dragon's blood and give it to the ancestral dragon. The ancestral dragon sword's big move allowed him to transform into the ancestral dragon true body and fight for 10 minutes. The ancestral dragon true body was a true desolate level Yuan Ku. One could imagine how terrifying this ability was. Originally, this was a big move that required the sword wielder to have a first-grade sword mark to activate. However, there was another way to activate the ancestral dragon true body, and that was to use the true dragon's blood. In reality, the sword wielder could consume 3 years of his lifespan to condense a drop of true dragon's blood. Even if the ancestral dragon sword didn't have a profound sword mark, it would still be able to use its big move. In the game, it was naturally impossible to force the sword wielder's lifespan, so it was changed to using 300,000 quarks of sword essence to condense the true dragon's blood. 300,000 quarks of sword essence, for some of the weaker spirit sword level sword wielder, was equivalent to 10 years of accumulation. 10 years of hard work was gone in an instant. It was normal for Tianjin to be unwilling to condense the true dragon's blood. Unfortunately, he had such a great grandmother. Tianjin had no other choice. Not good. The other party is going to transform into the ancestral dragon true body. Once it succeeds, I will definitely lose. When Guhan saw the way the ancestral dragon forced Tianjin, he knew that the other party was going to use the ancestral dragon true body. This was simply a bug-like skill. Guhan didn't expect that the ancestral dragon would actually force his sword wielder to consume 300,000 quarks to condense the true dragon's blood. Looks like I can only use that method. Guhan's expression changed. He threw King Yu into the air, and King Yu's sword lady form appeared. What? Do you want me to fight with the ancestral dragon? I can't beat her. As soon as King Yu came out, he asked in confusion and annoyance. King Yu, close your eyes. Before King Yu could understand what was going on, he was pulled into Guhan's embrace and kissed King Yu's lips. Woo! King Yu whimpered. This wasn't only because he was forcefully kissed by Guhan. More importantly, under the cover of his clothes, one of Guhan's hands quickly reached into King Yu's clothes and grabbed a lump of crispy chicken. In public. In broad daylight. It was too exciting. Chapter 648. What are you trying to do? King Yu transmitted a thought to Guhan through the sword mark. This thought also contained King Yu's shyness. The way to defeat ancestral dragon, Ji Yuhan replied dryly. When King Yu heard this, he felt a burst of anger for no reason. He opened his mouth and bit hard on Ji Yuhan's lips that were on his lips. A sharp pain traveled from the nerves on Guhan's lips to Guhan's mind. Soon after, Guhan's power erupted. It's coming. Guhan's hand reached deep into King Yu's thigh and grabbed the hilt of his sword. Before King Yu could react, he was turned into a sword by Guhan. At this moment, military governor was still military governor, but vaguely, he didn't seem to be the original Guhan. On the other side, ancestral dragon also swallowed the true dragon blood in Skyquake's body. Her young girl's body suddenly turned into a wriggling Chinese dragon. Chinese dragons were the supreme species in the world. They had horns like a deer, head like a camel, eyes like a rabbit, neck like a snake, abdomen like a crab, scales like a fish, claws like an eagle, palms like a tiger, ears like a cow. They could be big or small, they could rise or hide. When they were big, they could breathe out mist. When they were small, they could hide. When they were small, they could hide. When they were high, they could soar in the universe. When they were low, they could hide. Ancestral dragon was different from ordinary dragons. Ancestral dragon was the ancestor of all dragons, the ancestor of all dragons in the world. Among his descendants, there were only 5 clawed golden dragons at most. However, ancestral dragon had 9 claws. It was the only 9-clawed golden dragon in the world. Furthermore, other dragon heads had 2 dragon horns, while the ancestral dragon only had 1 dragon horn. This meant that there was no other dragon head that was second to none. The ancestral dragon borrowed the power of the true dragon's blood and successfully transformed into the ancestral dragon's body. His physique was more than 10 times stronger than when he was in the sword maiden form. Ancestral dragon was extremely excited. With a dragon roar, she grabbed at Guhan with lightning speed. Now that her physical fitness had increased tenfold, her speed naturally increased tenfold as well. Dealing with Guhan had become a very simple matter. However, what ancestral dragon imagined didn't happen. Ancestral dragon's claw went down, but it still missed. Ancestral dragon looked down and found that the military governor was actually beside his claw, but his claw miraculously missed. I must have been too excited just now. That's why I missed. Ancestral dragon thought of a reasonable explanation for herself. This time, her 2 claws grabbed at the military governor from 2 different directions at the same time to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Unexpectedly, the moment the ancestral dragon's claws moved, the military governor dodged to the side in a strange manner, evading the ancestral dragon's attack in advance. This is impossible. Ancestral dragon was a little crazy. The audience was surprised to find that even though the ancestral dragon sword had transformed into the ancestral dragon form, it still couldn't do anything to Guhan. No matter how ancestral dragon's claws tried to grab him, the military governor was slippery and couldn't be caught no matter what. Later, the audience slowed down the video by 200 times and realized that every inch of Guhan's skin seemed to have learned to dodge. He completely grasped the timing of the ancestral dragon's attack to dodge. It was as if he could control every cell in his body. The ancestral dragon was a desolate grade Yuan Ku. The military governor could actually dodge the ancestral dragon's attack. Didn't this mean that the military governor already had the ability to fight against the desolate grade Yuan Ku? Of course, this was impossible. How could the military governor be a match for the desolate grade Yuan Ku? The military governor could dodge the ancestral dragon's attack because the current ancestral dragon wasn't the real ancestral dragon. It could only be considered a defective product. The real desolate grade Yuan Ku ancestral dragon had countless god powers. Each god power could make the military governor go see King Yama immediately. However, the transformed ancestral dragon didn't have any of these god powers. Even in terms of power and speed, it only inherited less than 1/30th of the ancestral dragon. After the ancestral dragon sword transformed, the ancestral dragon's power was closely related to the sword wielder's power. If an emperor sword wielder used this ability, the ancestral dragon sword could even recover 100% of the ancestral dragon's power. However, if a spirit sword wielder forced out the blood of a true dragon, the effect would naturally be greatly reduced. Therefore, the ancestral dragon sword couldn't use any god powers. It could only use the simplest form of hand-to-hand combat to fight Guhan. The ancestral dragon sword's original plan wasn't wrong. Although she couldn't use god powers after the ancestral dragon transformation, her power and speed would increase by 10 times. She could definitely easily crush the military governor. However, She didn't expect that her ancestral dragon sword could transform into the ancestral dragon and that Guhan could use the magical Green Lotus White Root Body ability. The Green Lotus White Root Body could increase the military governor's control of his body by more than 100 times. It allowed Guhan to control his body's potential to the limit. He barely dodged the ancestral dragon's attack. The Blue Lotus White Lotus Body was the first sword of the Blue Lotus Three Swords, but it could not be used as he wished. He had to make the sword chi of the Blue Lotus Three Swords surge to the extreme. Under normal circumstances, Ji Yuhan could do this by continuously circulating the mental cultivation method of the Blue Lotus Three Swords. However, this would require dozens of cycles, which would take more than 10 minutes. However, Guhan didn't have 10 minutes just now. Therefore, he could only use the shortcut. Through the flames of lust and lust, he quickly let the three Green Lotus Swords' sword chi surge. This was also the reason why Guhan kissed King Yu in public and attacked his chest. However, the Green Lotus White Root Body wasn't continuous. After a period of time, the effects would disappear. It would take a long time to accumulate sword chi again. Once the effects of the Green Lotus White Root Body disappeared, Guhan would immediately be torn to pieces by the ancestral dragon. However, the ancestral dragon's transformation wasn't continuous. It was constant. Once the time passed, the ancestral dragon would return to its original state. However, the ancestral dragon was even more miserable than Guhan. Once the ancestral dragon's transformation disappeared, the ancestral dragon sword would lose its ability to fight and go into a coma. It would take more than 3 days to recover. In other words, as long as the military governor could endure the duration of the ancestral dragon's transformation, the Green Lotus White Root Body would last longer than the ancestral dragon's transformation. Guhan would win without a doubt. Therefore, the battle that originally tested the strength of both sides suddenly became a battle that tested the duration of a certain skill. The result seemed to be that Guhan's Green Lotus White Root Body lasted a bit longer. After about 5 minutes, the ancestral dragon suddenly let out a despairing roar. It shook in the air and returned to its sword form. It fell to the ground and lost its ability to fight. Tianzhen saw that the ancestral dragon body that he had spent 300,000 quarks of sword essence to exchange for had also failed. His hope of obtaining 100,000 quarks of sword essence liquid to make up for the sword essence he had lost was completely shattered. Tianzhen's eyes rolled back and he fainted along with the ancestral dragon sword. Everyone. The winner is Mr. Military Governor. The host walked to the ring in disbelief. He wanted to grab the military governor's hand and raise it for him. However, the moment the host touched Guhan's hand, Guhan quivered and slapped the host's stomach. The host was directly sent flying by Guhan. Mr. Military Governor? Are you crazy? The host got up from the ground and asked angrily. Guhan didn't say anything because Guhan didn't know what to say. His control over his body had increased by 100 times. Similarly, the various tactile sensations of his body had also increased by 100 times. When the host touched the back of Guhan's hand just now, he directly increased his tactile sensations by 100 times. This caused Guhan to subconsciously slap the host and send him flying. Damn it, what bad luck. The host cursed and then said angrily, Mr. Military Governor, your next opponent is the sword wielder of the Legend of Sword and Fairy group. After the previous battle, you now have a total of 188,000 quarks of sword essence liquid. The prize for the first place of the Legend of Sword and Fairy group is 320,000 quarks of sword essence liquid. May I ask how many quarks of sword essence liquid you would like to use as the wager for the next round? Seeing that Guhan had defeated a sword wielder who was half a Legend of Sword and Fairy, the host naturally thought that the military governor should continue the competition. Anyway, he was already used to the military governor's continuous creation of miracles. I give up. Guhan's voice was a little weak and shaky. Alright, according to the quarks of sword essence you have, your next opponent is. The host only realized something halfway through his sentence. He turned to look at the military governor strangely. Mr. Military Governor? Did I hear you correctly? What did you say? I said, I give up. I give up on continuing the challenge. This time, it seemed like Guhan could no longer control his tongue. His voice was constantly shaky, as though something was about to explode from his body. Mr. Military Governor, actually, you can continue the challenge. If you are not interested, you can just use tens of thousands of quarks of sword essence liquid and legend of sword and fairy level experts. The host still wanted to persuade him, but he did not expect the military governor to suddenly stare at him with a pair of bloodshot eyes. Word by word, as though he was suppressing his anger, he said, "Give me my prize. I want to give up." "All right, I understand." The host waved his hand, and all the quarks of sword essence liquid that Guhan had won appeared in front of Guhan. Guhan waved his hand, and the quarks of sword essence liquid entered his dimensional pocket. Then, the next moment, Guhan left the competition and exited the arena. "Mr. Admiral, you should at least say a few words before you leave." Seeing that the military governor had left, the host wanted to cry but had no tears. However, no matter what, the military governor had created an unprecedented record in this competition. Even the exciting battles between sword and emperor sword wielders could no longer attract the attention of the players. After the competition ended, the military governor's name once again appeared in every corner of the forum. All the posts were discussing the military governor's ability and analyzing the recording of the military governor's battle. The more the players analyzed, the more they felt that the military governor's ability was terrifying. The strongest sword wielder in the history of Sword Lady Online. This title that countless players could only dream of but could not attain seemed to be placed on the military governor's head. What was Guhan doing now? Why was he in such a hurry to leave the competition? Chapter 649. The reason why Jiyu Han was in such a hurry to leave the competition was because he could no longer control the power in his body. I wonder if everyone still remembers the first time Jiyu Han used the Green Lotus 3 swords in real life. It was in Yeyang Fortress. In order to clear the Yuan Ku in the fortress, Guhan had no choice but to activate Green Lotus White Root Body. As a result, when he eliminated all the Yuan Ku, Guhan escaped into a small room and completed his first blood. It was the same in the game. In reality, after Guhan lost his first blood, he could control Green Lotus White Root Body more freely. But in the game, Guhan still had his first blood. Therefore, after using Green Lotus White Root Body, Guhan had no choice but to enter a situation that he had encountered in reality. To be honest, Guhan didn't expect this. This was completely out of Guhan's expectations. After the host was sent flying by Guhan, Guhan's Green Lotus White Root Body was automatically removed and replaced by Endless Desire. If it weren't for the last bit of rationality, Guhan would have almost taken off his clothes on the spot. Therefore, Guhan didn't have any intention of challenging the legend of the sword and fairy team. After retrieving his reward, Guhan left the arena and returned to his bedroom in the sword tomb at a godlike speed. "Military governor, you pervert. What's wrong with you? We have to settle what you did to me just now." The moment he returned to his room, King Yu was freed. King Yu's first reaction was naturally to settle the score with Guhan for teasing him in the arena. However, he didn't expect that before he finished speaking, he would be pushed onto the bed by a naked figure. "You pervert, you actually took off your clothes. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do to me?" The King of Yu was horrified to find that the military governor had taken off all of his clothes. The thing under him that was as hard as an iron rod was pressed against his lower body. 3,000 words have been omitted below. Looking at Guhan, who was sleeping like a baby, and thinking of the madness just now, King Yu felt a wave of pain and fear. "You bastard, pervert, beast. It's been more than 1,000 years, and you've taken my first time." The angry King Yu fiercely twisted the military governor's arm, causing his flesh to swell. However, Guhan was still sleeping soundly without any reaction. As an excellent sword master, it was rare for him to sleep so soundly. It seemed like the battle just now really exhausted and refreshed Guhan. King Yu hugged Guhan's arm and rested his head on Guhan's chest as he muttered weakly, "Despicable thing, why didn't I resist and let you succeed?" As a fragment of King Yu's consciousness, The sword lady in the game wasn't completely controlled by the swordsman. Just like what had happened just now, as long as the King of You was unwilling, he could immediately force the commander offline and file a complaint to the officials. Once it was verified, the player would be permanently banned and would never be allowed to log into the game again. If the situation was serious, the player would be held responsible in real life. So if King Yu wanted to reject Guhan, Guhan wouldn't even be able to touch his body. He would be directly kicked offline. However, for some strange reason, King Yu still allowed Guhan to succeed. In these 1,000 years, no matter which swordsman he followed, King Yu had never let anyone succeed. Even Kanzu treated him with respect until the end. In the end, the first blood was taken by Guhan. Thinking about such a headache, King Yu gradually fell asleep. He didn't know how long he slept for before he woke up from a rustling sound. He opened his eyes and saw that it was the sound of Guhan putting on his clothes. When he saw Guhan putting on his clothes, King Yu felt a sense of fear. It was as if after putting on his clothes, Guhan would leave him forever. He would take his blood and put on his clothes. Die. The more King Yu thought about it, the angrier he got. He wanted to kick Guhan's butt, but Guhan reacted quickly. Before King Yu's bare feet could touch Guhan's butt, Guhan grabbed King Yu's feet and gently placed them on the bed. What's wrong? You want to kick me as soon as you wake up? Guhan rolled his eyes at King Yu. Of course I'm going to kick you. You bastard, pervert, beast, return it to me, return it to me, return it. King Yu babbled and refused to let Guhan return it to him. I know. Guhan patted King Yu's face lightly. Last night was my fault. My martial arts went berserk and I couldn't control my soul anymore. That's why I did that to you. If you hate me, I'm willing to let you deal with me. TCH, you make it sound like I'm willing to deal with you. King Yu stuck out his tongue and hid his head under the blanket. Guhan smiled bitterly and continued putting on his clothes. What are you going to do after putting on your clothes? King Yu's voice came from under the blanket. I'm going to eat the sword essence oral liquid and then go back to reality. I've been in the game for almost 30 hours. I have to go out. Guhan replied. Mph, back to reality. If you have the ability, don't enter the game for the rest of your life. King Yu muttered unhappily. Hearing her lines and attitude, King Yu was becoming more and more like a little wife. Although that was what King Yu said, he knew better than anyone else that reality was the foundation. The game was just a way for Ji Yu Han to improve himself. Ji Yu Han's ultimate goal was still in reality. Just like those spirit sword and immortal sword wielders in reality, they rarely returned to the game because the things in the game didn't have much meaning to them anymore. Thinking of this, King Yu felt a wave of annoyance. Since Ji Yu Han was destined to belong to the real world, then what was the fragment of his consciousness in the game? An inflatable doll? Or the female lead of an AR game? When are you going to synchronize with my main body? King Yu stuck her head out and looked at Guhan very seriously. Guhan's hand that was buttoning his shirt trembled, and he quickly replied, Don't worry, I'll definitely find you in reality in a month or 3 months. 1 more month. So slow. King Yu retracted her head. She seemed to have forgotten that 1 month was the fastest time. In reality, she might have to wait for 3 months. Scram back to reality. You were so fierce last night that my lower part hurt a lot. I want to sleep. Guhan returned to the living room of the sword tomb and placed all the sword essence oral liquid he had harvested on the table. After drinking all of it, I can increase my sword essence by 180,000 quarks and become a spirit sword wielder in reality. Seeing the table full of sword essence oral liquid and thinking about the meaning of the sword essence oral liquid, Guhan felt that it was inconceivable. It was as unrealistic as a dream. Of course it's not that exaggerated. Suddenly, a petite figure sat on Guhan's lap. Tomono Kakaze rubbed her butt against Guhan's body and asked meaningfully, Did you feel good last night? Are you spying on me? Guhan frowned. Please, this game is like my body. You guys are in my body. Hey, how could I not know? Tomono Kakaze rubbed against him again and changed to a more comfortable position. Why did you come to find me? Don't tell me it's just to ask this kind of boring question. Guhan grabbed Tomono Kakaze from his body. She rubbed against him twice, which made little Guhan raise his head again. Ever since he broke his vows, Guhan found that his body seemed to be looking forward to this kind of boring mating behavior. Of course, I'm not concerned about this kind of boring thing. Tomono Kakaze stood on the table where Guhan had placed a large pile of sword essence oral fluid. She said very seriously, I'm here to remind you that you can drink at most 10,000 quarks a month, or else you'll regret it. I can only drink 10,000 quarks a month. Why? Guhan knocked on the table rhythmically. I know that your body is very special and can convert 100% of the sword essence oral fluid, but do you think the converted sword essence fell from the sky? In fact, the sword essence is originally hidden in your body. It just needs a special kind of power to stimulate it, and the game is the way to stimulate this power. Your body can stimulate 10,000 quarks a month at most, and that's the limit. Once you exceed this limit, a certain part of your body will die, and you can forget about being a normal man in the future. Tomono Kakaze stuck out her tongue. I'm done talking. I escaped in secret. I'm leaving. Think about it yourself. After saying that, Tomono Kakaze disappeared. She's really a good person. She specially came over to remind me of this. Guhan looked at the sword essence oral fluid with a gloomy expression, hesitating whether he should believe Tomono Kakaze's words. Guhan vaguely felt that the problem here was probably not as simple as Tomono Kakaze said. There must be a big problem hidden here, which was why Tomono Kakaze took such a big risk and personally came out to stop him from taking the sword essence oral fluid. Forget it, I'll be more cautious. Guhan thought about it and put most of the sword essence oral fluid into his dimensional pocket, leaving only 10,000 quarks outside. He then drank it in one gulp. In the character's attribute panel, there were immediately 10,000 quarks of sword essence. The effect was immediate. Chapter 650. Shihua. Lu Yin. Guhan woke up from the game and stretched. He found that Lu Shihua and Lu Yin were not in the room. He didn't know where they went. Guhan shook his head. He planned to explain some things to Lu Shihua and Lu Yin, but since they were not there, there was nothing to say. He returned to the game. King Yu was just done by him. She must be eager for him to accompany her. I should accompany her more. After my body recovers, I'm afraid I won't have so much time. But maybe because he was too excited, Guhan shook his head violently and shook the helmet to the side of his head. So Guhan reached out to grab the game helmet beside his head. When Guhan grabbed the helmet in his hand and was about to put it on again, Guhan was stunned. His hand actually grabbed the helmet. My hand can move. Guhan threw the helmet aside and shook his hand crazily as if he was possessed. That's right, Guhan's hand returned to normal. But it wasn't just his hand that returned to normal. Then, Guhan was surprised to find that he had regained control of his whole body. Although his body was still in pain, he had regained control of his body. Guhan could sit up freely on the bed. Great. Guhan was excited. He immediately wanted to get out of bed and walk, but as soon as he left the bed, he staggered and fell to the ground. His face was covered in dust. Because his legs hadn't been exercised for a long time, they didn't listen to him. But it didn't matter. As long as he practiced more, he could return to normal. Ha ha. Ha ha. Although he fell to the ground, Guhan lost his mind and laughed. The moment he fell, his lower body felt pressured. This was the feeling of little Guhan being pressured. Guhan's little Guhan had returned. Guhan had returned to the state of a man. Guhan immediately held onto the edge of the bed and walked all the way to the only mirror in Lu Shihua's house. When he saw that the person in the mirror was indeed Guhan and was no longer Jiyu Shenyuan, Guhan finally let out a sigh of relief. The damned state was finally over. Military governor, why are you in the real world? Where's Master? Where did Master go? At this point, Juzi had also transformed from a sword into a sword lady. She walked out of her bed and stared at Jiyu Han in astonishment. She felt that it was very strange. Why was a character in the game here in real life? Where was the owner of Jiyu Han's fate? I'm your master. Guhan knocked on Ju's head. Don't tell anyone about Jiyu Shen Yuan. Are you really my master? Juzi came close to Guhan's hand and sniffed it. She waved her hand and said, No, my master doesn't smell like this. Juzi, squat down. Guhan glared at Juzi and gave a forceful order through Zifu. Thus, Juzi squatted down with a confused look. Now do you believe that I'm your master? Guhan knocked on Juzi's head again. I believe. Master, can you not use forceful orders on me in the future? Juzi will listen to you. Juzi doesn't like the feeling of being forceful, Juzi said with a sad face. She really didn't like the feeling of being forcefully ordered. Sorry, I won't do it in the future, Guhan said apologetically. At the same time, he added in his heart, we probably won't have a future. Sorry, I can't let King Yu down. But Juzi is indeed worthy of being the famous sword-level sword maiden that Yi Qing specially prepared for me. Her attributes are even more terrifying than the 3-foot sword. It's too much of a pity to give up just like this. Guhan thought about it again. Actually, after knowing the true attributes of Juzi's sword, Guhan had wavered. He wanted to just give up on King Yu in the game and choose the Juzi sword, which was several times stronger than King Yu, as his famous sword-level sword maiden. This was the most correct decision that suited his own interests. But all of this hesitation disappeared after he took the first drop of King Yu's blood. If he gave up on King Yu like this, then what kind of man would Guhan be? But when he thought about giving up on Juzi's sword, a famous sword-level sword maiden that could stand shoulder to shoulder with a spirit sword-level sword maiden, Guhan still felt that it was a pity. It would be great if he could have both. Even if Guhan wanted to use the sword maiden grafting technique, it would be impossible. This was because the sword maiden grafting technique could only be used once and couldn't be used a second time. This time, it had already been used on Duyu. It was impossible for Guhan to have two famous sword-level sword maidens at the same time. He could only choose one of the two and give up on one. Guhan kept thinking about these things. Unknowingly, after a while, he faintly heard Juzi ask, Master, can I stand up? Squatting is so tiring. This Juzi actually maintained her squatting position and didn't dare to move without Guhan's order. What a good sword maiden. Guhan helped Juzi up and sighed. He said to her, help me look after me, I'm going to change my clothes. Then, help me recover my meridians. Protect me. Yes. Master. Juzi's expression changed back to that of a wooden person. After saying that, Guhan took off the set of Lu Shihua's female clothes and took out a brand new set of men's clothes from his dimensional pocket. He then sat on the ground and meditated. He circulated his energy to recover the meridians in his legs. He wanted to restore the meridians in this disobedient leg to normal so that he wouldn't fall on his face again. Just when Guhan was meditating, suddenly, Lu Shihua's door was directly pushed open. Lu Shihua ran back breathlessly and barged in shouting, Miss Shenyuan, can you do me a favor and save little Yin? When Lu Shihua said this, he found that the bed was already empty. The cup was also carelessly flipped over. He couldn't see Jiyu Xuanyuan's figure at all. It seemed that she had already left. Moreover, a strange man was sitting on the ground of his house. He sat cross-legged with his hands clasped together as if he was cultivating in a game. Who are you? Why are you in my house? I'm going to call the police, Lu Shihua asked vigilantly. However, she soon saw that Juzi was quietly guarding the man's side. She felt a little safer. Since Juzi didn't do anything here, it might mean that this man was not a bad person. Master is cultivating. We can't disturb him. Juzi walked to Lu Shihua's side and said dryly, Master, isn't the owner of your Juzi sword Miss Shenyuan? When did another master appear? Lu Shihua already knew a lot about the sword lady. He felt that Juzi's answer was a little strange. Juzi shut up because she didn't know how to explain. Just now, Guhan had already told her not to say anything about Jiyu Shenyuan. She couldn't disobey the order and be bound by the mandatory order. Lu Shihua seemed to feel that this man was not too dangerous. He tiptoed to his side and carefully looked at the other's appearance. He always felt that he had seen him somewhere. It was a very familiar person, but Lu Shihua couldn't remember who he was. What's wrong? Don't you even recognize me? Guhan opened his eyes. The meridians in his legs had been restored. He stood up from the ground. Although there was still some discomfort, it was no longer a problem for him to stand. You are Master Military Governor? Hearing Guhan's voice, a muscle in Lu Shihua's brain twitched. She suddenly thought of something. If she left a scar on the face of the man in front of her, wouldn't it be the same as the military governor's? It's me. Guhan nodded. Master Military Governor, it's really you. Why are you here? Lu Shihua shouted in surprise and went to Guhan's side. She was very excited. She didn't expect that the military governor would appear in front of her at this time. This was really a surprise. Well, I'm here to pick up my Shen Yuan. Ji Yuhan smiled and said, it's not proper for her to live here all the time, so I took her back home. I stayed here to see you, to thank you for taking care of Shen Yuan, and to move you to a new home. You can't live in such a place. Ji Yuhan smiled and said, you can't live here. It's okay. Miss Shen Yuan has also helped us a lot. Lu Shihua smiled and then her face changed. Master, what did you just say? You want to change our home? Yes, this is not a place where the disciple of the military governor should live. You can't live here. I'll change your home. Guhan glanced at Lu Shihua and asked, what's wrong? You don't want to leave this home? Well, although this place is broken, it's a lifetime of memories for me and little Yin. Lu Shihua nodded and then bowed to Guhan. Thank you, Master Military Governor, but Shihua doesn't want to move. Shihua doesn't want to trouble Master. Master has helped me a lot. Memories are memories. Don't let them entangle your future. Guhan touched Lu Shihua's head. The comfort brought by Guhan's big hand almost made Lu Shihua want to lean into Guhan's arms. After I settle down, you and little Yin will live in my house in a few days. That way, it will be more convenient for me to guide you in your training in the real world. You are my disciple, my helper. I want to train you into the best sword wielder. Trust me. Ji Yuhan said gently. Lu Shihua was intoxicated by her words. Wait. I'm going to live with Master. Live in the same space. Or in reality. Lu Shihua suddenly felt a burst of excitement and happiness fill his whole body. He couldn't wait to live in it immediately. Damn. Lu Shihua, what the hell are you thinking? Lu Shihua's face turned red. Some strange thoughts were thrown out of his mind. By the way, what did you say when you came in? You asked me to save little Yin. What happened to little Yin? Guhan remembered Lu Shihua's shout when he entered the door. Oh no, Master, can you save little Yin? He was captured by the people of the Sword Council. They said that they want him to do hard labor outside the city. Master, please save him. Lu Shihua suddenly remembered his original purpose and said in a panic. Chapter 651. Lu Yin was indeed arrested by the Sword Council, but after hearing the reason for Lu Yin's arrest, Guhan didn't really want to save this guy. So what was the reason? It was like this. Because Lu Yin sympathized with Guhan's beheading incident, he joined a QQ group called For Freedom, Democracy, Fraternity, and Harmony, severely punished the murderer Guhan and became an active member in the group. As a result, yesterday, the owner of the group, who rarely showed his face, suddenly encouraged members to participate in a large-scale rally and demonstration tomorrow, demanding that Guhan be severely punished. Naturally, Lu Yin joined the demonstration. Lu Shihua was worried, so he chased after him as well. According to Lu Shihua, the demonstration gathered a lot of people, about 70,000 to 80,000 people, surrounding the entire temporary service center for sword-bearers. However, not long after, thousands of police officers suddenly rushed out of the temporary service center for sword-bearers. Without saying a word, they began to arrest people, beat them, and locked them in jail. About 500 to 600 people were arrested. Because Lu Yin was standing at the front, he shouted the loudest, so naturally, he was arrested by the police. Lu Shihua had no choice but to run home, hoping that Jiyu Shenyuan could use the identity of a sword-bearer to release his brother. After listening to Lu Shihua's narration, Guhan didn't know how to treat this idiot Lu Yin. This guy was arrested because he protested, and now he was hoping that Guhan would rescue him. This was really ridiculous. If possible, Guhan didn't want to care about Lu Yin's life at all. But unfortunately, Lu Yin's sister was Lu Shihua. For the sake of this precious disciple, Guhan had to eat this fly. However, Guhan was very curious. Since Lu Shihua saw his real face, why didn't Lu Shihua recognize that he was Guhan? It seemed that his missing person notice was played 30 times a day on TV. Thinking of this, Guhan took out half a mask from his dimensional pocket and put it on his face. Now that the public was so disgusted with Guhan, it was not appropriate for him to reveal his real face. I don't want anyone to recognize me as the military governor, so I need this. Guhan looked at the puzzled Lu Shihua and said, I understand. I'll arrange everything. Don't worry, Lu Yin will be fine. After Guhan finished speaking, he staggered out of Lu Shihua's house. This was the first time he had left this room in more than 10 days. Seeing the sunlight that he hadn't seen for a long time, Guhan felt very emotional. Master, what happened to your leg? Lu Shihua could tell that there was something wrong with the military governor's leg. He immediately went up to support Guhan's body and asked with concern. I'm a little obsessed with cultivation. Guhan answered vaguely. Hearing Guhan's words, Lu Shihua immediately took advantage of the situation and said, Master, then Shihua will take you. Where are you going now? To the temporary swordbearer's service center? Are you worried that I won't save your brother? Guhan looked at Lu Shihua with a faint smile. Lu Shihua stuck out his tongue and blushed. I'll go to the swordbearer's service center later. Come with me to pick them up now. I don't know how these two little guys are doing. Guhan sighed. He had already sensed Qingpin and Jiu Yun's location. These two cute little guys hadn't gone to find Liu Lei. He didn't know where they were wandering. It was really hard for them. With Lu Shihua's support, Guhan slowly walked toward Qingpin's location. When they crossed Toad Street, passers-by saw Lu Shihua supporting Guhan. They couldn't help but cover their mouths and smile. They kept pointing at Lu Shihua and Guhan as if they found something very interesting. Some young boys were unhappy when they saw this scene. They looked at the military governor angrily as if they wanted to kill Guhan. If Lu Shihua hadn't glared at them so that they wouldn't dare to act rashly, they would have rushed up to them. They seemed to have misunderstood something. Lu Shihua lowered her head shyly. I'll give them a good scolding later, and then explain it to them clearly. Explain what? There's no need to explain it to these people. Guhan glanced at these hot-blooded youths. Your world is already different from theirs. From now on, you are people of two different worlds. There's no need for you to interact with them anymore. Hearing Guhan's words, Lu Shihua's hand trembled. He asked tentatively, do sword-bearers and ordinary people really have to be separated like this? Didn't we sword-bearers come from the group of ordinary people? The emperor before the apocalypse was also an ordinary person. However, once he became the emperor, could he still be an ordinary person? Guhan said calmly. It's not that sword-bearers can't be the same as ordinary people. It's just that sword-bearers are different from ordinary people. You have to understand this. We shoulder the survival of mankind, so we are different from them. We need to fight constantly and sacrifice constantly. All they needed to do was to survive here. This was the most essential difference. Responsibility determines status. The more we enjoy, the more we have to bear. You're no longer the Lu Shihua of the past. Guhan withdrew his hand from Lu Shihua's and smiled. My legs are almost healed. I can walk on my own. Oh, Lu Shihua replied. Sure enough, Guhan could basically walk, although his walking posture was still a little weird. Therefore, Lu Shihua silently followed behind Guhan and didn't say a word. Obviously, she didn't agree with Guhan's argument just now. The two of them walked in silence for a long time. Lu Shihua realized that Guhan had stopped in front of him. He raised his head and found that he was standing in front of a school. The signboard had the words Yangming High School written on it. I've heard of this place. This seems to be the temporary headquarters of the human sword-bearers during the Great Invasion. Why is there no one here? Lu Shihua found that the school was empty and couldn't help but ask curiously. Because most of the students are dead, there's no need for so many schools. So the students went to another well-preserved school. Guhan said as he walked to the school gate. Wait, the gate here is locked. We can't get in, Lu Shihua said quickly. The school gate was firmly locked by an electronic lock. It was impossible to open it without a fingerprint or password. Unexpectedly, Guhan just touched the gate gently, and the electronic lock suddenly beeped and opened by itself. Guhan walked into the school with Lu Shihua, who was a little confused. The school that Guhan had once visited in a hurry was completely quiet. It was a mess inside. All kinds of teaching equipment were thrown on the ground and piled up with countless garbage everywhere. Guhan knew that this was the trace left behind when Yangming High School served as a temporary headquarters. Probably because they were too lazy to clean up these things, they abandoned Yangming High School and merged the surviving students here into other schools. According to Guhan's feeling, Qingpin and the others were not far from him. He walked with Lu Shihua on the messy field and finally stopped in front of a dormitory building. According to his senses, Qingpin and Ji Yun were in the dormitory building. Master, what is this thing you brought? At the gate of the dormitory, Lu Shihua looked at Guhan strangely as he put a cute panda-like bag on his chest. It looked like a bag used to abduct and sell children. It's used to carry a little kid. Guhan's answer surprised Lu Shihua. He really abducted and sold children. You wait here and wait for me to come out. You don't have to follow me, Guhan said to Lu Shihua and went straight into the dormitory building. Sure enough, in a room on the first floor of the dormitory building, Guhan found his two cute sword maidens. He took off his mask and found the two cute guys lying on the bed with drool all over their faces. Their clothes were not neatly dressed and were rolled up, revealing a smooth little belly. It was cold to the touch and it was cold to the touch. Fortunately, they were sword maidens and didn't catch a cold or cough. Otherwise, it would be big trouble. Oh, Ji Yun, I smell Guhan. Guhan is here, I want to eat meat. Qingpin sniffed, then turned around and hugged Ji Yun beside him. He whimpered and added, I want braised pork. I want to eat fish, not meat. Ji Yun ate Qingpin's finger that was raised to the side of her mouth and then bit hard. Ah! Ouch! 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 I'm going to kill someone and eat Qingpin. Qingpin was in so much pain that his tears flowed out. One of his hands kept shaking, trying to pull his finger out of Ji Yun's iron teeth. But Ji Yun was biting very hard, as if she was nailed to Qingpin's finger. She shook along with Qingpin's small hand and refused to let go. Guhan, help, let go of your stinky sister. Qingpin suddenly jumped into Guhan's arms with Ji Yun, who was biting his finger. Wait, something seemed wrong. For a moment, Qingpin didn't speak and stopped crying. He looked at Guhan in a daze and then patted Ji Yun's head. Stupid dead fish, bite me hard again. I seem to be still in a dream, I bite. Ji Yun was very obedient. She bit hard again with her sharp little teeth. It hurts, but it doesn't seem to work. Qingpin murmured. Okay, you're not dreaming. I'm back. Guhan's eyes were sparkling. He grabbed Qingpin's little neck and stuffed her into the nursery bag that he had prepared. Do you believe that you're not dreaming now? No. I often come here in my dreams. Qingpin poked his head out and sent Ji Yun, who was biting his hand, to Guhan. Stinky Guhan, get your sister down, and I'll believe that you're stinky Guhan. Hey. Guhan stretched out a hand and scratched Ji Yun's little foot. Ji Yun felt itchy and loosened her mouth naturally. Then, she twisted a few times in Guhan's hand like a live fish. She opened her eyes and saw Guhan. Hey, Qingpin. Bite me. I seem to be dreaming. Ji Yun patted the poor man's face, and the poor man bit down without hesitation. It was a chance to take revenge that was delivered to his doorstep. Chapter 652. Guhan, hurry up and let me have a bite. I haven't eaten meat for thousands of years. Qingpin, who finally woke up, opened his mouth to eat Guhan's meat. Seeing that his two treasures were living such a pitiful life in this dormitory, Guhan felt ashamed in his heart. Guhan, who would absolutely not agree to Qingpin's request, actually put his finger into Qingpin's mouth. Qingpin was just about to fiercely bite down, but he suddenly thought of something. He stretched out his little tongue and licked Guhan's finger. Guhan suddenly felt that his finger was itchy and a little moist. Bah! Stupid Guhan, you actually don't wash your hands. Qingpin spat and felt disgusted. Stupid Qingpin. The golden spot in front of Guhan's chest was already gone, but Ji Yun only had her own place to go. She quickly climbed onto Guhan's body and sat on Guhan's shoulder. She forcefully hammered a small fist on Guhan's head. Smelly brother, bad brother, where did you go to die? Ji Yun missed you so much. Woo woo. As she spoke, Ji Yun, this strong little girl, actually started to cry. Ari, brother was seriously injured and lost the ability to move. Even his Zifu was sealed. Today, I just got better and came to find you. Guhan explained half-truthfully. I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen. I don't want to listen. After Guhan didn't know how long it took for him to explain, but he finally coaxed Ji Yun, this little ancestor. In fact, Guhan understood that Ji Yun didn't want to make trouble. She was just simply venting the negative emotions that had accumulated in the past few days. And Qingpin, this heartless guy, smiled and looked at Ji Yun and Ji Yun's fight. Then he changed into a comfortable position in the nursery bag. Ari, the happiest thing in life is lying in Guhan's nursery bag. After Ji Yun vented out her negative emotions, she sat on Guhan's neck very obediently. At this time, Guhan had time to ask a question that he wanted to ask since he entered the door. Who is the person lying here? Guhan asked, pointing to the blonde girl who was sleeping on another bed. Brother, let me tell you. This is all Qingpin's doing. Qingpin is too heavy. He smashed other people's heads, so other people are relying on Qingpin, Ji Yun said with certainty. Nonsense. How is Qingpin heavy? Qingpin is still cute. He is a little light, okay? In order to prove that he didn't become heavier, Qingpin also jumped twice in the nursery bag. He almost bent Guhan's recovered waist. You see, when I jumped before, Guhan would fall. Now Guhan is fine. This proves that Qingpin not only didn't become heavier, but also became lighter. Qingpin hasn't eaten meat for thousands of years. How can he become heavier? Qingpin looked dissatisfied. Brother, you are so pitiful. Ji Yun touched Guhan's head. Why don't we throw this little fat pig into the garbage dump? We don't want her anymore. Okay, you two tell me what happened. Guhan smiled bitterly. Then he roughly figured out what had happened after Qingpin and Ji Yun explained it one after another. It turned out that this woman was Liu Anna. Liu Anna, who had been left in the Personal Terminal Administration Bureau by Qingpin, actually found the place where she had only lived for one night. Facing Liu Anna, who was giggling and complaining that she was hungry, Qingpin and Ji Yun met their nemesis. They could only save some money to feed her. When speaking of this, Qingpin squeezed out a few tears from his eyes. Qingpin is so pitiful. Qingpin could eat 2 mouthfuls of meat a day, but now he can only eat 1 mouthful. It was all taken away by her. Alas, this cute girl would only cry when it came to food. I'll send this woman to the hospital and see if I can restore her memory. Guhan had a way to deal with it. Although he didn't know whether her coma had anything to do with Qingpin's weight, there was no doubt that it had something to do with Qingpin. Anyway, he was not short of money now. He would be a good person and cure this woman's memory. Then he would let her find her family. Thinking of this, Guhan was about to wake Liu Anna up. When he walked closer, he was surprised to find that this Liu Anna was very unusual. Because Liu Anna actually had 5 scabbards hanging on her body. Qingpin and Ji Yun didn't understand and thought that Liu Anna just liked to cosplay as a swordsman. However, Ji Yuhan could clearly see that these 5 scabbards were all scabbards used by real sword ladies. Among them, there was even a spirit sword grade scabbard that was worth thousands of gold coins. This was a scabbard that could only be used by a spirit sword grade sword lady. It was a scabbard that could allow a spirit sword grade sword lady to quickly restore her personal shield. P.S. Corrected a bug. Previously, It was written that Liu Anna had 6 scabbards on her body. The author is crazy. It should be 5 scabbards. Corrected. This thing was not rare in the game, but in reality, it was a very rare treasure. Even among the 3 swordsmen of the spiritual sword level, not one of them had this thing. An ordinary person with a scabbard of the spiritual sword level that was worth tens of thousands of gold coins swaggered through the market and cosplayed. Even if Guhan was beaten to death, Guhan wouldn't believe that there was such a person. If there was such a person, she would have been robbed long ago. So there was only one truth. This amnesiac woman was indeed a swordsman, and she was at least a swordsman of the spiritual sword level. Although a swordsman of the immortal sword level should have 5 scabbards, would an immortal sword level swordsman lose her memory? Guhan instinctively rejected this idea. He only thought that Liu Anna carried an extra scabbard on her out of interest. To be honest, there were many swordsmen like this. Some people even carried 6 scabbards on their bodies to experience the feeling of an emperor sword level swordsman. But if she was a swordsman of the spiritual sword level, this didn't make sense. Guhan had basically seen the photos of the swordsman of the spiritual sword level in Yuzhang City, and there was no such person at all. Remembering that Qing Pin once said that her genetic information couldn't be found in the Personal Terminal Administration Bureau, Guhan suspected that this person was likely to be a swordsman of other base cities. Since Liu Anna was a swordsman, Guhan couldn't deal with her indiscriminately. He had to hand her over to the Swordsman Service Center. Guhan patted her body, trying to wake her up. Maybe it was because she slept especially soundly after losing her memory, Guhan couldn't wake her up no matter what. It was Qing Pin who jumped out of the nursery bag, pinched her nose, and waited for a few minutes before waking her up. Lu Shihua was very bored and waited outside the dormitory for almost an hour before he finally saw Guhan come out of the dormitory. It was just that there were a little too many people coming out. There was a little brat sitting in the pocket in front of Ji Yuhan's chest, another brat sitting on his head, and behind him was a blonde beauty with big breasts and a slender waist. Looking at her breasts, then looking at his own breasts, Lu Shihua suddenly felt a sense of loss. This world was too unfair. Stinky brother, is this your apprentice? Why is it another woman? Don't we have enough women in our family? Ji Yun pulled Guhan's hair with dissatisfaction. Guhan had just told them about Lu Shihua and told Qing Pin and Ji Yun not to talk about him. Qing Pin didn't have any reaction when she saw Lu Shihua. She closed her eyes comfortably and enjoyed the warmth of Guhan's arms. Let's go, you guys come with me. By the way, Shihua, please take care of Liu Anna. She has lost her memory. Don't let her run around. After Guhan finished speaking, he walked in the front with Qing Pin and Ji Yun. Although Lu Shihua was full of questions, he could only follow Guhan and walk behind them, holding Liu Anna's hand. When they came out of the school gate, Guhan saw the electronic lock on the iron gate. He thought of something and asked curiously, "There is an electronic lock here. How did you two get in?" "We came in from the back door." Qing Pin answered first and then complained to Guhan. Qing Pin opened the door with her sword. Ji Yun is so lazy that she only knows how to command Qing Pin. It turned out that these two people broke the school wall to get in. Indeed, for the sword lady, this kind of wall was nothing. "It smells so good. I seem to smell meat." Qing Pin had the best nose. Not long after they walked, she was the first to smell the smell she had been dreaming of. Guhan touched Qing Pin's head lovingly and said with a smile, "I know you haven't eaten meat for thousands of years. Today, I'll give you a good reward. Hooray!" Qing Pin immediately cheered, and then desperately pulled Guhan's clothes in the nursery bag, thinking that it could make Guhan walk faster. Lu Shihua, who had been following Guhan, suddenly felt a little sad when she saw Guhan chatting with Qing Pin and Ji Yun all the way, but not saying a word to her. This was the first time that Lu Shihua had felt this feeling of being ignored. Lu Shihua lowered her head and thought about these trivial things. She didn't realize that they had arrived at the door of the building until her head hit the glass door. Lu Shihua looked up and saw the name Chanel Pork Cuisine chain of luxury stores. Lu Shihua had heard of this store before. Her neighbor, Auntie Wang, told her about it. One of Auntie Wang's relatives had once brought her here for a meal. Then, Auntie Wang bragged about it for a whole year. She praised the pork cuisine here to the point that it was unparalleled. Lu Shihua, who was still a child at that time, was extremely envious. She felt that the greatest achievement in her life was to have a meal here. She didn't expect that her wish would come true at this time. "What are you doing here? Come in." Guhan saw Lu Shihua standing at the door in a daze and grabbed her hand. Lu Shihua wanted to refuse, but when she felt the warmth of Guhan's palm, she didn't say a word and let Guhan pull her into the store. Chapter 653. In the Chanel store, it was usually crowded at this time of the day. However, less than 1/3 of the seats were occupied. This was all because of the aftermath of the last big attack. More than half of the population in the core area died, and the remaining people were not in the mood to enjoy food at this time. Moreover, it was said that this Chanel store was the disaster area during the big attack. Many people hid in the store and were finally attacked by Yuan Ku. They were eaten as Yuan Ku's food in the store. Actually, this was complete nonsense. If that was the case, this Chanel store wouldn't have opened so quickly. No matter what, it would have taken at least a few months to finish cleaning up the place. But no matter what, these things had a fatal impact on Chanel's business, so the business in the Chanel store was much worse. At this time, the diners were not in the mood to eat. They looked at a group of people at a big table, which was made up of 5 people. 1 man, 2 women, and 2 children. The 5 people ate in a strange way. The man even wore a mask when he ate, and even when he was eating, he did not take it off. This was not bad. The ugliest one was the blonde woman. She looked like she was in her 30s, but she ate the meat directly with her hands. She grabbed the greasy dompa pork with her hands and sent it directly into her mouth. In the blink of an eye, she ate up the natural pork that was worth tens of thousands of yuan. The second ugliest one was the little girl with some baby fat. She sat directly at the table with chopsticks in her hands. One of her hands was holding braised pork, and the other was dompa pork. She ate 1 bite at a time. She ate even faster than the blonde woman. In just a few minutes, the diners saw that the child had eaten at least 20 adult servings of natural pork. The last one was another child. She sat on a chair and did not wolf down the meat. Instead, she mashed the pork, picked up pieces the size of a fly, and sent them into her mouth. As she ate, she frowned, as if the delicious pork was very unpalatable. These 5 people were naturally Guhan, his sword lady, Lu Shihua, and Liu Anna. It had been a while since Jiyu Han had eaten meat, and she was a bit hungry, so she ate a lot more than usual. After she finished eating, she smiled and said to Lu Shihua, "Come, eat a bit more. It's my treat today." The pork was really delicious. Lu Shihua had never eaten such delicious food. Although she felt that she should not eat Guhan like this, she could not stop eating. However, once the pork entered his mouth, he couldn't stop. After eating 1 piece, he couldn't wait to eat another. When he knew that Lu Shihua's stomach really couldn't hold it anymore, he reluctantly put down his bowl and chopsticks. On the other side, the poor man finally let out a satisfied burp. Although he had been eating pork for the same amount of time as Lu Shihua, the amount he ate was 100 times more than Lu Shihua. He was like a human meat grinder. When Meiyun's cooking is better. People like Qing Pin, who put down the bowl and chopsticks and scolded the chef, were the most unkind. But to be honest, Guhan also thought that Wen Meiyun's cooking was more delicious. It seemed that he and Wen Meiyun had met for the first time in this Chanel restaurant. At that time, Guhan had just become an ancient sword wielder. Everything had just begun. When he thought of Wen Meiyun, he thought of home. When he thought of home, he began to miss his home. He didn't know if his home had been preserved during the invasion. "Okay, let's go home," Guhan said when he saw that everyone except Liu Anna had finished eating. Lu Shihua, who was next to Guhan, was a little anxious. "Master Military Governor? Let's go save little Yin. What's the hurry? The police station is not a dangerous place. They won't do anything to little Yin." Guhan turned his head and looked into Lu Shihua's eyes very seriously. Little Yin doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He is too ignorant. It's good to let him suffer a little, lest he is easily taken advantage of by others in the future. But little Yin has never been to the police station alone. I'm afraid that he will be afraid inside, and that Guhan might ask the police to teach little Yin a lesson. I'm afraid that little Yin will be hurt if we are late, Lu Shihua said nervously. Hearing Lu Shihua's words, Qing Pin and Jiu Yun looked at Guhan at the same time. Their faces were strange. These little guys usually looked cute and silly, but why did they want to look so smart? Oh, by the way, have you seen Guhan? Guhan suddenly asked. I remember that the TV has been broadcasting Guhan's missing person notices. You should know him. No. Lu Shihua shook his head. Who is interested in paying attention to this guy's appearance? Guhan nodded. He finally understood why Lu Shihua didn't recognize him at the beginning. He waved his hand and signaled the waiter to pay the bill. Hello, sir. You have eaten a total of 652 jin of pork. We will deduct the odd part and count it as 650 jin. You have to pay a total of 520,000 renminbi. The waiter stared at Guhan as she spoke. She was afraid that he would immediately run away after hearing the price. Moreover, she also noticed 520,000, not much. It's still fair. Guhan smiled. Then please pay the bill. The waiter handed over the service terminal. According to common sense, Guhan only needed to touch his personal terminal on the service terminal to complete the transfer. But the problem was that Guhan didn't have a personal terminal. How could he use it to transfer the money? Of course, since Guhan dared to come here to eat, he naturally had a way to pay. Guhan pushed the service terminal away from him and then asked, "Where is your control computer here?" "Lend it to me." "Sir, the control computer is absolutely not allowed to be used by employees of our restaurant. You can't use our control computer." "I'm sorry." The waiter looked at Guhan with increasing vigilance. This person wouldn't want to destroy the restaurant, would he? To be honest, if you let me use the control computer, I have the money to pay the bill. If you don't lend me the control computer, then I can only apologize. Ji Yuhan spread his hands, and the waiter almost couldn't catch his breath. There was no other way. This kind of thing was no longer something that the waiter could handle. The waiter immediately called the manager over. The manager thought for a while and decided to agree to Guhan's request. However, he accompanied Guhan and monitored Guhan to prevent him from destroying the control computer. The manager saw Guhan walk in front of the control computer and then casually press a few times on the desktop. A software page that the manager had never seen before popped up. Then, this page could actually start the rarely used iris detection system on the computer. After detecting the iris of the person wearing the mask, the control computer automatically entered an interface that the manager never dared to imagine. This is the big background of Yuzhong Bank. The manager, who had worked in a bank for a period of time, recognized the origin of this interface at a glance. This turned out to be the official big background of Yuzhong Bank, the only bank in Yuzhong City. Guhan entered the number 520,000 in the box and then pressed it. His personal terminal received a message saying that 520,000 renminbi had been transferred from Yuzhong Bank to the official account of the restaurant. "Okay, I've paid the money. I can go now." Guhan smiled and left the restaurant with his people, leaving the dumbfounded manager behind. "Are you kidding me? Even the president of the bank doesn't have the right to use the back end of the bank to transfer money to an enterprise. Who the hell is this masked man?" The manager muttered to himself. Suddenly, he shuddered. On the television, anyone who saw this kind of confidential matter would be silence. Thinking of this, the manager immediately decided to shut his mouth forever. Until he died, he dared not tell anyone about what happened today. Sure enough, his home was finished. When Guhan returned to Sankingshan district, he saw that more than half of the buildings in the district had been turned into ruins. The building that Guhan lived in had also been flattened. There was a construction team cleaning up the rest of the ruins. It seemed that the ruins of Guhan's home had been cleaned up by this construction team. Ji Yuhan looked at this piece of flat land and actually felt a little sad. He shook his head and cleared these emotions from his mind. Then, He quickly left the place with the confused Lu Shihua and the others. Since his original home was gone, he would find a new one. According to the rules of the Sword Committee, ancient sword and treasure sword level swordbearers lived in a house of more than 200 square meters. After becoming a famous sword level swordbearer, they could ask the Sword Committee for a house of more than 1,000 square meters that took up an entire floor. Originally, Guhan didn't want to move, but now he had no choice but to move. If he wanted to get a new house, he would have to go to the Swordbearers Service Center to replace his personal terminal. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to apply for a new house through the Sword Committee's procedures. Therefore, Guhan took Lu Shihua and the others to the temporary Swordbearers Service Center in the normal district. As soon as they arrived at the entrance of the center, Guhan saw a group of people in mourning clothes holding white banners with the words "Return my father's life, return my father's justice, please bring the murderous demon Guhan to justice," and so on. Guhan naturally guessed that these were the family members of the unlucky bastard that he had beheaded. Compared to the tears that streamed down their faces on the television, although these people were kneeling, their faces were full of smiles. The unlucky son was actually using his personal terminal to project the game interface. He was playing the game, and as he played, he even muttered something like "addicted to damage output, watching others die" and so on. Guhan quietly took out the camera from his dimensional pocket and recorded this scene. Then, he brought everyone into the temporary Swordbearers Service Center. Chapter 654. As soon as Guhan entered the temporary Swordbearers Service Center, he walked toward the Special Swordbearers Area sign. In the temporary Swordbearers Service Center, other than a small area for normal people to conduct synchronization experiments, the rest of the area was off-limits to non-swordbearers. The group of people outside had been causing a ruckus these few days, so the security inside the temporary Swordbearers Service Center was much stricter than usual. "Who are you? Please show me your swordbearer's personal terminal, or you will not be allowed to enter." There were 2 policemen guarding the entrance. Of course, the honorable swordbearers would not do such a thing. If normal people caused trouble, the policemen with guns would be enough. If it was a swordbearer causing trouble, the guards were just a waste of time. There would naturally be swordbearers in the center to deal with these stupid people. These guards were all looking at the personal terminal of the people who attempted to enter. If it was a personal terminal of a swordbearer, they would naturally not stop it, even if it was a group of people behind them. However, if normal people tried to enter, these policemen would not hesitate to stop them. "If you can't show us your swordbearer's personal terminal, we will have to take you back to the police station. Wearing a mask and sneaking around, we suspect that you are trying to destroy the temporary Swordbearers Service Center," the policeman on guard said confidently. In their eyes, Guhan was too suspicious. Not only did he not have a swordbearer's personal terminal, but there were also 2 children hanging behind him. Although the blonde woman behind him had 5 scabbards hanging on her, these 5 scabbards were the funniest. What kind of joke was this? Did she think she was an immortal swordbearer with a silly look on her face? This group of people was too suspicious. They had to be taken down immediately. The 2 policemen were about to give the order when Guhan had no choice but to drag Qingpin, who had fallen asleep in the baby pouch, out. He grabbed her neck and turned Qingpin into Qingpin's sword. "Can this prove my identity?" Guhan asked as he placed Qingpin's sword in front of the 2 policemen. The 2 policemen wiped the cold sweat off their foreheads. Good Lord, did the swordsman not bring his personal terminal to play tricks on them? "Please come in." The 2 policemen could only helplessly lower their heads and made a gesture of invitation. "You did the right thing. It was my mistake." Guhan helped the 2 policemen up, patted their shoulders, and said with a smile, "You guys are loyal to your duty. You don't have to bend down, you are also heroes. Thank you." The 2 policemen immediately felt their noses sour, and their hearts were filled with emotion. Their eyes actually became a little watery, and their impression of Guhan also rose sharply. "So this child is the military governor's sword mistress," I thought. Lu Shihua let out a huge sigh of relief. She thought Qingpin was the military governor's daughter, which was why the military governor took such good care of her and spoiled her so much. Thinking of these things made her heart ache. Liu Shihua originally thought that Guhan would go to the Swordsman Service Center to apply for a new personal terminal, but she didn't expect to follow Guhan all the way to the top floor of the temporary service center. There were no other departments on the top floor, only a signboard hanging on the door. Office of the Chairman of the Sword Committee. Master, we went the wrong way. The place to apply for a personal terminal is not here. Liu Shihua pulled Guhan's sleeve and whispered. Yes, it's here. Guhan smiled, ignoring Liu Shihua's shocked face, and went straight to the office door. Seeing this scene, Liu Shihua was frightened. This was the office of the supreme leader of Yuzhang City. How could the military governor open the door so easily? He should at least knock on the door. Guhan had no choice but to go straight in. Liu Shihua could only follow. The office was actually 2 floors. Behind this door was the living room for receiving guests. There were sofas, coffee tables, and other things. There was another door inside, which was Liu Lei's office. Who is it? Don't you know the rules? You came in without knocking. Do you think I'm not in the office? Liu Lei's angry voice came from the door. Liu Shihua trembled. Is this the voice of the big boss of Yuzhang City? It's too scary. Liu Shihua's feeling was just like how ordinary people felt when they saw Shi Da Master. It's me, your disciple. Ji Yuhan bowed deeply towards the door and said solemnly. Bang! The door inside was violently opened. Liu Lei, with a face full of annoyance and surprise, threw a sword chi at Guhan's head. Don't worry, this was not a sword chi that could kill, but a sword chi that was as round as a hammer. Liu Lei's sword chi hit Guhan's head unceremoniously and said, Get in here, and then disappeared at the door. You sit outside and wait for my news. Guhan asked Liu Shihua to look after Liu Anna and the others, and then he went into the office. In the office, Guhan suffered inhumane abuse. Liu Lei kept patting Guhan's shoulder with more than a ton of force until half of Guhan's shoulder was swollen. Then Liu Lei smiled with satisfaction and sat back in the chair. Tell me, where have you been hiding for the past 10 days? Why did you suddenly come to find me? Liu Lei asked with satisfaction. I can't tell you where I'm hiding, but master, I'm looking for you to ask you for a house. My home is gone, so you have to make up for it. Although his shoulder was hurting badly, Ji Yuhan still said without changing his expression. That's easy. Now all the sword bearers who lost their houses have been relocated to Lushan district. I'll arrange a house for you there. Liu Lei said carelessly. This. Master. I'm a famous sword bearer now, and I should be able to get a big house. Guhan said again. A famous sword bearer? Liu Lei was shocked. He put his hand on Guhan's zifu and felt it. Sure enough, he felt the sword essence. This was the sword essence of a famous sword bearer. His apprentice had really become a famous sword bearer. Good apprentice, it hasn't been 3 months, but you've already become a famous sword bearer. Even if you've eaten the sword essence oral solution in the game, your speed can't be so fast. Liu Lei said with surprise. He didn't know that he had accidentally revealed the origin of Guhan's sword essence, which scared Guhan so much that his expression didn't change. Yes, I didn't use the wrong words. Good. Good. Suddenly, Liu Lei burst into laughter. Yesterday, those old fogies were still saying that there had never been a sword pavilion master at the treasure sword rank. Now, you're a famous sword rank swordsman. There have only been 2 sword pavilion masters at the famous sword rank since ancient times. Besides, you were just an ordinary person 3 months ago. This kind of talent is rare since ancient times. Let's see what else they can say. It seemed that Di Shan's people had given Liu Lei a lot of pressure recently. That was why he was so happy after hearing that Guhan had become a famous sword bearer. Obviously, this made Liu Lei more confident. Master, what are those people doing now? Had the envoy of the City of London arrived? Your health is more important. Why don't you let me handle these things? Guhan was worried that Liu Lei's body couldn't handle so many things. It's okay. Master has been through all kinds of storms. This kind of conspiracy is not a big deal. However, it's strange about the special envoy from London. It's been so long, but she still hasn't come. A few days ago, London sent a letter asking about her. It seems that they have also lost contact with the special envoy, Liu Lei said strangely. What's so strange about that? On the way, they crossed the sea and went through Yuan Ku's territory. It's normal for the special envoy to be killed by Yuan Ku on the way. If she's really dead, then we won't have so much trouble. Gu Han showed his cunning side. What are you talking about? This special envoy is a fairy sword-bearer. How could she be killed on the way? If she's really dead, there's nothing to be happy about. We still have a few fairy sword-bearers left. We can't sacrifice this kind of fighting force anymore. Liu Lei knocked on Gu Han's shoulder again. Gu Han decisively shut his mouth. Since you're back, don't show yourself. The longer you hide, the better it will be for us. Do you understand? Liu Lei said again. Of course I can continue to hide, but I'm afraid that Di Shan's people will do something desperate. Gu Han said worriedly. Master, do you know what happened this morning? What happened? Is it about the police arresting people? Why? Do you think I did something wrong and shouldn't have arrested them? Liu Lei glanced at Gu Han and asked meaningfully. Master, did you ask people to do that? I thought it was Di Shan's people arresting themselves for fun, Gu Han said while twitching his mouth. You little devil, you can even see through this. Liu Lei kicked Ji Yuhan's leg. That's right, I'm not stupid enough to do such a thing that would incur the wrath of the heavens. Those old fellas used my name to do such a thing. They just want to smear your name with another layer of ink so that you will never be able to rise again. Disciple doesn't care about tarnishing my reputation, but master, once this person is caught, it won't be as simple as tarnishing my reputation. The entire sword-bearers will be tarnished, and if we allow these people to control the media to spread the news, I'm afraid that it won't just be me, but the entire sword-bearers. This will cause a large-scale conflict, and their actions will hurt themselves. Ji Yuhan said helplessly. H, let's see who will be the unlucky one then. Master, disciple has a plan. Ji Yuhan moved closer to Liu Lei's ear and whispered, causing Liu Lei's eyes to smile. Chapter 655. Then Gu Han and Liu Lei discussed a whole set of follow-up measures. Finally, Gu Han showed a long-lost smile and took a sip of tea with satisfaction. Liu Lei seemed to think of something, put down the teapot, and said, Good disciple, you seem to have brought some people here just now. Who did you bring? How can you bring them to my office casually? Liu Lei said with some dissatisfaction. 2 of them are my sword maidens, and I have to take them with me. As for the other 2, one is your disciple's disciple, and the other is someone you have to deal with. Gu Han said with a smile. Disciple's disciple. I actually have a disciple's disciple. Liu Lei was taken aback and looked at Gu Han unhappily. I accepted you as my disciple when I was more than 80 years old. You are less than 20 years old, and you have also accepted a disciple. Why are you so anxious? Are you waiting for death? Do you have to accept a disciple when you are about to die? What kind of concept is this? Gu Han was unable to complain about Liu Lei's concept, and could only say, no, this disciple's talent is too good. If I don't accept him as your disciple's disciple, I'm afraid he will be taken away by others. What talent? Is it better than the talent of your precious disciple? Liu Lei said disdainfully, as if his disciple was the best in the world. As a result, when Gu Han told Liu Lei about Lu Shihua's aptitude and ability, Liu Lei was so jealous that his face suddenly turned red, and he kicked Gu Han again. Such a good seedling, it's a pity to give it to you. Let me accept another disciple. How good it will be for you to have one more junior sister, you brat. Lu Shihua sat quietly on the sofa with Liu Anna, secretly guessing what had happened in the room. On the other side, the 2 troublemakers, Qing Pin and Ji Yun, used the living room as their playground, jumping around on the sofa, and 2 or 3 teapots and teacups were broken. These were authentic Ru Kill imitations. Although Lu Shihua didn't know much about porcelain, looking at the fragments on the ground, he felt distressed. If he sold them, how much money would they be worth? Shihua, bring Anna in. Suddenly, Gu Han's voice came from the room. Lu Shihua stood up nervously, tidied up his clothes, and tried to look elegant and tidy. Then he took the silly Liu Anna and walked into Liu Lei's office. This was the first time Liu Shihua had seen the big boss of Yuzhong City with his own eyes. His first impression was that this boss was very amiable. He looked at Liu Shihua with a kind gaze, as if he was looking at his granddaughter. As soon as they met, Liu Shihua was very touched. What Liu Shihua didn't know was that Liu Lei was feeling bitter in his heart. Such a good seedling had actually turned his disciple into his grand disciple. It was truly a pity. After Liu Lei warmed up Liu Shihua, he turned his attention to Liu Anna. This is the sword wielder who lost his memory. Why do I find it so familiar? Liu Lei said to himself. Suddenly, he patted his head and quickly opened his personal terminal. He clicked a few times and projected an account card. Guhan fixed his eyes on it and found that it was a photo of Liu Anna. In this photo, Liu Anna was valiant and dignified, just like a warrior. She was completely different from the silly Liu Anna now. More importantly, although Liu Anna was full of spirit in the photo, she was old with wrinkles. She was at least in her 50s. But now Liu Anna looked at most in her 30s, much younger than the Liu Anna in the photo. Is this a photo of Liu Anna's mother? Guhan asked subconsciously. No. Liu Lei shook his head with a solemn look, and then gestured to Liu Shihua. Guhan understood. He knew that Liu Lei had something important to tell him alone, so he took Liu Shihua back to the reception room and told her to wait for a while. She is the special envoy of the City of London. When only Guhan, Liu Lei, and Liu Anna were left in the room, Liu Lei said solemnly. The photo just now was sent to me by the City of London. She is John Anna, the third sword wielder of the City of London who became a fairy sword wielder last year. The name and the photo are all right. There can't be any mistake. She is the special envoy of the City of London. Even Guhan did not think of this, but after it was pointed out, he instantly understood. However, if Liu Anna was the special envoy of the City of London, then many problems could be explained. Because Liu Anna was from the City of London, there was no genetic information about her in Yuzhong City. Because she was a sword wielder at the fairy sword wielder level, she would naturally wear 5 scabbards. And according to what Qing Pin said, the time when Liu Anna was found was the time when the special envoy of the City of London was about to arrive. Everything was right. When you found her, she was like this. Liu Lei carefully observed Liu Anna's situation, pressed his hand on Liu Anna's Zifu mountain, felt the situation inside her Zifu mountain, and judged, her sword essence is very chaotic, and many of her meridians seem to be broken. It seems that she has suffered a very serious injury to become like this, and her 5 scabbards are all empty, and I can't see any sword ladies. This situation can only happen when she has experienced a very fierce battle and all the sword ladies are broken. On the way to Yuzhong City, she must have met some Yuan Ku and was defeated. Relying on the desperate resistance of the sword ladies, she opened the void door and escaped into Yuzhong City. In a few words, Liu Lei roughly guessed Liu Anna's situation based on his rich experience. But Master, Liu Anna is a sword wielder at the fairy sword wielder level. To break all the sword ladies of the fairy sword wielder level and make her lose her memory, I'm afraid only a flood level or a desolation level Yuan Ku can do it, right? Liu Lei sighed, it can't be wrong. She became like this because she fought with a flood level Yuan Ku. Since she could escape into Yuzhong City through the void door, the place of the battle must be near Yuzhong City. Is there a flood level Yuan Ku wandering around Yuzhong City? Liu Lei's words made Guhan's hair stand on end. If there was really a flood level Yuan Ku wandering around Yuzhong City, wouldn't it be possible for him to launch an attack on Yuzhong City at any time? Yuzhong City might not be in danger with the help of the dimensional shield, but the sword wielder fighting outside Yuzhong City would be in great danger. No, I can't turn a blind eye to this matter. I must immediately ask the sword wielder outside Yuzhong City to shrink their activity range, and at the same time, send a reconnaissance team to search the first battle scene to see if they can find traces of Liu Anna's battle and analyze the specific situation. Brat, if you have anything else to say, just say it and leave here. I have no time to entertain you, Liu Lei said in a hurry. Well, Master, I don't have anything else to say. It's just that my personal terminal was broken during the battle. Can you give me another one? It's too inconvenient without that thing, and there's also the problem of my house. Guhan told him his current 2 problems. This is for you. I've already prepared it for you. Even if it's not broken, you have to get a new personal terminal. Liu Lei took out a brand new personal terminal from his dimensional pocket and handed it to Guhan. Guhan looked at it carefully and found that it was different from the personal terminals of ordinary people and the personal terminals of the sword wielder. This personal terminal was pure gold and looked high-end and elegant. This is the personal terminal of the master of the sword Garrett. As long as you put it into your skin, it will be automatically bound to you. I've had this thing for 10 years, and now it's finally time to give it away, Liu Lei said with emotion. After thinking for a while, he added, remember, you'd better not use it in public. You're still missing now, understand? Yes, master. Guhan nodded. As for your house, it's at this address. I've already handed over the ownership. Now it's already your house. You can move in at any time. Liu Lei sent the information about the new house to Guhan. Guhan looked at the address and saw Mount Di Feng House. Seeing the address of Mount Di Feng, Guhan was obviously stunned. What's wrong? Are you afraid of being under the enemy's nose? Liu Lei asked in a strange tone. No, I just think it's interesting. Guhan smiled. Master, let's make a bet. I promise that unless I show up, the people of Mount Di Feng will never find out that I'm under their nose. I don't want to bet with you. Okay, you can get out. Liu Lei scolded. I'm so busy. Goodbye, master. Guhan bowed and was ready to leave. Wait. When Guhan's foot was half out of the door, he heard Liu Lei shout, take this person away. Why does she stay here? I don't have time to take care of her. But master, she is. After knowing that Liu Anna was a sword wielder of the fairy sword realm, Guhan did not want to provoke her anymore. This kind of thing could not be good. Whoever found her should take care of her. She has nothing to do with me. I'm so busy. How can I have time to take care of a stupid woman? Liu Lei rolled his eyes at Jiu Han. But she's our trump card now. You can't tell anyone else about her identity except me. London City has been playing tricks on us. This time, I'm going to make the Dragon Lion Sword Emperor beg me. I'm going to make him owe me, no, owe Yuzhong City a favor. Before I have a detailed plan, you're responsible for taking care of her. Well, since Liu Lei had said so, what else could Guhan do? He could only take this sword wielder of the fairy sword realm he picked up and go to his new home. Chapter 656. Mount Emperor had a different name in every base city, but every base city definitely had a place like this. Mount Emperor was where all the Emperor sword level sword holders lived. At the same time, it was where the Spirit sword level sword holders and the Fairy sword level sword holders lived. However, only the current Spirit sword level sword holders could live in Mount Emperor. Once a Spirit sword level sword holder died, his family would be forced to leave Mount Emperor and live in the core area where the famous sword level sword holders lived. If there was no new famous sword level sword holder in 3 generations, then they would be arranged to live in a normal house. Mount Emperor in Yuzhong City was a small hill. At the foot of the hill, there were rows of standalone villas. As for the hillside and the top of the hill, that was the Emperor sword level family territory. Every family had 10 hectares of land, and they could decorate it however they wanted. Emperor sword level families had their own pride. They would never allow their family's architectural style to be similar to other families. Therefore, the Emperor sword level families had their own unique architectural style. They had all kinds of architectural styles. They could even hold an architectural exhibition. Originally, Guhan was only a famous sword level sword holder, so he did not have the right to live in Mount Emperor. However, Guhan was the sword tower master. Therefore, Liu Lei still arranged a standalone building for Guhan in Mount Emperor called Phoenix House for Guhan to live in. It was said that there used to be an Emperor sword level sword holder living in Phoenix House. However, after he ascended to the throne, he moved to the Imperial Palace in Yuzhong City. As for whether this was true, only God knew. Ding dong. His personal terminal touched the scanner and the door to Mount Emperor opened. The screen at the entrance showed a bunch of messy code. Under normal circumstances, it should show Guhan's name. Obviously, this was because of Liu Lei's setting. He really did not want Guhan to expose his identity. Phoenix House was not far from the door. After walking slowly for less than 5 minutes, he saw the standalone building. The buildings on Mount Di were all in the classic style of China. They were made of pure red wood, showing the nobility of these buildings. Liu Shihua looked at the small building like Granny Liu entering the Grand View Garden. The entire building had a total of 5 floors. The first floor was 300 square meters, the second, third, and fourth floors were 266 square meters, and the top floor, the fifth floor, was only 150 square meters. The Phoenix House had already been renovated in advance, and all the household appliances and daily necessities were ready. Apart from the kitchen and bathroom, the first floor was a huge living room. A 200-inch Super TV hung on the wall like a monster. All the furniture was made of real leather and covered with extremely comfortable carpets. The crystal chandelier shone brightly even though it was not turned on. This was only the first floor. The entire second floor was a cultivation room equipped with all kinds of cultivation tools. On the third floor, there were 4 bedrooms, a recreation room, and a home cinema. There were also 4 bedrooms on the fourth floor, as well as a super master bedroom. This master bedroom was as large as 100 square meters, and the 5 meter by 5 meter square bed was also amazing. Sleeping in such a room would make people panic. What was even more amazing was that the ceiling of the master bedroom was made of glass, and through the glass, one could see the clear water above. That's right, the 5th floor was an entire floor with a swimming pool and a bathroom. It could be used as both a bathroom and a swimming pool. The owner of the master bedroom under the swimming pool could hear the beautiful sounds of the people swimming. The television in the master bedroom was attached with the entire Phoenix House's surveillance system, and one could see every movement in the Phoenix House. Next to the master bedroom was the quantum transmission room, which was used to quickly move around the city. However, since the Great Invasion, the entire quantum transmission room had been shut down by the Sword Commission. Before they found a way to prevent Yuan Ku from using the quantum transmission room to attack Yuzhong City again, the quantum transmission room would be shut down forever. Looking at the home appliances that she had only seen on television, as well as the dazzling variety of rooms and configurations, Liu Shihua felt as if she and these sword-bearers were not living on the same earth. These were all things that Liu Shihua had never imagined. She could not imagine that one day she would live in such a house. Is this the difference between a sword-bearer and an ordinary person? Liu Shihua could not help but think of what Guhan had said to her on the way here. Her heart twitched with uneasiness and resistance. She instinctively wanted to escape, but before she could move, Guhan grabbed her arm. "You can live here, if you want me to be little Yin." Guhan's words made it impossible for Liu Shihua to refuse. She could only let Guhan manipulate her. There were a total of 9 bedrooms in the Phoenix House, and the master bedroom was naturally Guhan's. Originally, Guhan wanted Qingpin and Jiyu Yun to live in the other 2 bedrooms on the 4th floor, but Qingpin and Jiyu Yun directly used the Great Rogue method. It was as if they were planted on Guhan's big bed, and they refused to leave no matter what. Helpless, Guhan could only acquiesce to these 2 cute girls living with him. However, Guhan still reserved 2 bedrooms for them. The remaining 2 bedrooms on the 4th floor seemed to be prepared for Yi Tian and Juzi. Ever since Guhan left Liu Shihua's house, he had not let Juzi out. Only now did he release Juzi from her sword. Only then did Qingpin and Jiyu Yun realize that they had another sister. "Wah, Juzi, long time no see." Unexpectedly, as soon as Juzi appeared, Jiyu Yun ran to Juzi's side in a very familiar manner. Juzi also very naturally hugged Jiyu Yun, as if the 2 of them knew each other. As for Qingpin, he sniffed his nose and complained in a low voice, "Smelly golden crow's smell, so annoying." He ignored Juzi and treated her as if she did not exist. There seemed to be quite a bit of conflict between the 2 of them. Guhan noticed Qingpin's reaction, remembered it, and then asked Jiyu Yun, "Do you know each other?" "Yes." According to Yu Chang's memory, when she was still a sword, we lived together for a period of time. We were the best of friends. Ji Yu Yun said happily. Ji Yu Yun had inherited both Ji Yu Yun and Yu Chang's memory, so she was very clear about Yu Chang's past. The memories of the ancient era were also very clear. This was a bit strange, because most of the sword maidens seemed to have forgotten their memories of being swords in the ancient era. Only a small portion of them still remembered these memories, but the sword maidens by Guhan's side all seemed to have very deep memories of the ancient era. Because Juzi also had these memories, and because she hugged Ji Yu Yun very intimately, she even smiled. This was definitely not something a sword maiden like Juzi could fake. But to be reasonable, the Juzi sword's master was Mo Zi, and the Yu Chang sword's master was Wu King Helu. These two people were separated by about 100 years, and yet they were able to become friends. This was a very miraculous thing. Only the heavens knew what happened between them back then. Juzi, you can stay in this room. Unexpectedly, Guhan did not arrange for Juzi's room to be on the 4th floor like the other sword maidens. Instead, he arranged for her to be on the 3rd floor. There was clearly an empty room on the 4th floor. Yes. Juzi agreed without any dissatisfaction. This was her master's order, and she would unconditionally obey. But this small detail fell into Ji Yu Yun and Lu Shihua's eyes. They instinctively felt that this Juzi and Guhan were not close. On the contrary, there seemed to be a thick layer between them. Juzi was heartless, and she strictly carried out every one of Guhan's orders. She shouldn't have any barrier between her and Guhan. This barrier came entirely from Guhan himself. It was as if Guhan had not yet treated Juzi as his sword maiden. Lu Shihua instinctively thought of the military governor's sword maiden in the game, Yu Wangjian. He thought of the relationship between Yu Wangjian and the military governor, which was like a couple. He seemed to have caught something in his heart. Lu Shihua's room was also arranged on the 3rd floor, next to Juzi's. Liu Anna lived with Lu Shihua. Because this woman had completely lost her IQ, Guhan was not at ease to let her live alone. Lu Shihua could only trouble Lu Shihua to take care of her. Lu Shihua had no objection to this. On the contrary, if he could do something for Guhan, he could live with a peace of mind. After the rooms were assigned, Lu Shihua asked to go back to his home to pack some clothes. Qing Pin and Ji Yu Yun ran to the top floor to swim. Only Liu Anna was watching TV in the living room with a silly smile. Guhan suddenly felt that this home was still lacking a little vitality. At least there was one less maid who could wash and cook for him. Where is Wen Maiyun? Did she die in the great attack? If Wen Maiyun died, Guhan would still be a little distressed. After all, he was used to people. Guhan was not the kind of person who liked the new and got tired of the old. With the personal terminal of the Sword Pavilion's pavilion master, Ji Yu Han could use a lot of authority. For example, he could look up an ordinary person's information and current situation. For an ordinary swordsman, it would be a complicated process, but for Ji Yu Han, it was just a matter of thought. He entered Wen Meiyun's name, and soon, Wen Meiyun's current situation appeared in front of Guhan. Wen Meiyun's current situation was not very good. According to the information, both of her legs had been eaten by Yuan Yang. More than half of her arm was also gone. When she was discovered, she was buried in a pile of rubble and was on the verge of death. Then the rescue team gave Wen Maiyun the most basic treatment and threw her into the shelter. Although medicine could restore limbs, Wen Maiyun obviously did not have so much money, so she could only rely on the most basic conditions to maintain her life in the shelter, living a disabled life. Alas, it's another troublesome thing. Guhan sighed. He originally wanted to enter the game, but now he could only take the bus to the shelter. Chapter 657. In the shelter, Wen Maiyun had a worried look on her face. She stared blankly at the lights in the distance. Her originally slender and plump thighs had completely disappeared. Her buttocks were tightly bound by bandages. Although there were several layers of bandages, the blood that seeped out from the inside had already dyed the bandages dark red. Wen Meiyun's right arm was also missing. It was also wrapped in a bloody bandage. There were people like Wen Maiyun everywhere in the shelter. Some of them were even more miserable than Wen Maiyun, such as the man lying on the bed next to Wen Maiyun. Everything below his heart was gone. He relied on the artificial internal circulation system to sustain his life. Originally, there was no need to save such a person. However, the new chairman of the council expressed that he would not give up on a living person. Therefore, this man had to painfully maintain his identity. When Maiyun remembered that during the first few days when this man was living in the shelter, various officials would come to inspect the place with reporters and cameras. They would stand beside this man and say a few words of comfort, pat his shoulder, say a few words of encouragement, and leave some seemingly good nutrition for him. After that, they never appeared again. Later on, probably because the popularity of this incident had died down, the officials also stopped coming to show off. This man could only rely on moans to show that he was still alive. Suddenly, when Maiyun found that the man's unmoved, his hand slowly groped on the table beside him. Finally, his hand touched a shriveled apple on the table. On this apple, there was a fruit knife inserted into it. This was the apple left by an official who came to comfort him. This official kindly peeled half of the apple for him. When he was about to feed the man, he was stopped by the nurse. The reason was simple. This man had lost his stomach. For the sake of treatment, his esophagus had been completely sealed. Feeding him an apple wouldn't have any effect at all. Instead, it would accumulate in his esophagus and eventually turn into a pile of rotten things. Hearing this, the official smiled embarrassedly and left the apple on the table. He didn't take it away. Now, the apple had completely rotted. The original yellow flesh had turned black, just like when Maiyun's mood. The man finally touched the apple. Then, he grabbed the fruit knife on the apple and removed the fruit knife with difficulty. Then, without hesitation, he cut off the rubber tube hanging on his body. This was the tube that connected the artificial internal circulation system to his body. The man's blood flowed continuously in it, and it was equivalent to the man's aorta. The man had cut the rubber tube, which meant that he had given up on living. Without the help of the artificial internal circulation system, he would die from excessive blood loss in less than 5 minutes. In the end, he succeeded. The rubber tube broke, and the blood inside flowed out. In addition to Wen Maiyun, there were many people who saw this. However, the patients around them did not make a sound. They did not say a word or remind the doctors. Even when 2 caregivers passed by, they only showed a slight look of pity on their faces. Then, they instantly became much more relaxed. The patients didn't say anything because they understood the man's pain. It was better to die than to live like this. The 2 caregivers didn't say anything because it was very troublesome to take care of this man. If he died, these caregivers would be much more relaxed. In such silence, the man died. However, before he died, Wen Maiyun seemed to hear a gloomy laughter from hell. Then, the man waved his hand powerlessly, and the fruit knife in his hand flew out and finally fell on Wen Maiyun's bed. The shelter controlled knives. Except for doctors, no one was allowed to touch knives. However, this apple was an accident. For a few days, no one actually noticed this apple, so the fruit knife luckily escaped the fate of being confiscated. Now that the fruit knife was on Wen Maiyun's bed, Wen Maiyun felt that this was her fate. Fate was telling her that she did not need to live anymore. Perhaps she could still struggle on for a dozen or even a few decades, but what was the point of that? Other than being a burden to Xiao Ya, what else could she do? She could not drag Xiao Ya's future down. As long as she died, Xiao Ya would be free. Every mother's thoughts were pitifully innocent. Wen Maiyun just didn't want to be a burden to Long Xiao Ya, so she wanted to end her life. Even if she was still full of longing for life. With that thought, Wen Maiyun grabbed the fruit knife on the bed and wanted to commit suicide. However, she was just a woman. In such a short time, she actually couldn't think of how to die. Don't think that suicide is a very easy thing. You can just cut your neck, but that must be done in a hidden place with no one around. Now that Wen Maiyun was really in a shelter with so many people, if she committed suicide, there would probably be people coming to save her immediately. She was not like that man. For that man, death was a kind of happiness, so others would not stop him. But Wen Maiyun was different. First, it was because her injury was not to the extent that death was better than living. Second, it was because she was a beautiful woman. Even if her legs and hands were broken, it wouldn't change this. The man next to her still had some desire for her, so how could he let her die? If he saw her commit suicide, he would definitely save her to increase his favorability. So after thinking for a while, even with the fruit knife in her hand, Wen Maiyun couldn't think of a way to completely kill herself. Why don't I cut my wrist under the quilt and commit suicide? After thinking for a while, Wen Maiyun thought of a good way, which was to commit suicide by cutting her wrist. As long as she hid her wrist under the quilt and pretended to be asleep, no one would notice her abnormality. But on second thought, this was not realistic. She only had one hand, and the fruit knife was not big. How could she use her left hand to cut her wrist? Ordinary people could not do this at all. So when Maiyun changed her mind and decided to cut her stomach. It was just that it would be a little too ugly to die like this. Ah, Wen Maiyun, you are about to die. Why do you care if it's ugly or not? Wen Maiyun laughed at herself. She used the hand holding the fruit knife under the quilt and used it to cut her stomach. The facial features on her face twisted, and then she suddenly revealed a somewhat happy smile. She closed her eyes, looking no different from sleeping. Mom, are you feeling better? At this time, Long Xiaoya, who had a dirty face and messy hair, walked in with a laundry basin. She had just washed and dried her mother's clothes, and then she was about to change her mother's dressing, but she found her mother lying on the bed with a smile on her face and sleeping soundly. She couldn't bear to disturb her and wanted to let her sleep a little longer. She didn't know that her mother's stomach had already bloomed, and there was a pool of blood under the quilt. In a few minutes, she would die completely. Long Xiaoya had experienced a lot in the past few days. She didn't rest at all today. She couldn't help but lie on the bed and prepare to sleep. Just as she closed her eyes, she felt that someone was standing behind her. Long Xiaoya raised her head in confusion and saw a man with a red mask standing behind her. Who are you? Are you looking for someone? I know these uncles, aunties, and aunties. I can help you find them. Long Xiaoya thought that this person was looking for her relatives, but she was very strange. Why did he wear a mask? Was he stupid? You are Long Xiaoya, Wen Maiyun's daughter? This person's voice was very pleasant. Are you looking for us? Are you Mom's friend? Only then did Long Xiaoya realize that this person was actually looking for her and her daughter. However, after so many days, other than Auntie Guogua and a graceful and capable middle-aged woman who Long Xiaoya had never seen before, no one else had come to see her and her daughter. In Long Xiaoya's memory, she couldn't remember the existence of any relatives. Why was this man looking for her and her daughter? She's so badly injured. This masked man was naturally Gu Han. He sighed and said, "Your mother is the maid of the sword-bearer, right? You can go to the sword committee. They will give you better care. Then our sword-bearer must be alive." Long Xiaoya's eyes were dim. The TV has been broadcasting his missing person notice for more than 10 days. Mom said that he is most likely dead. Will the sword committee care about Mom? If Mom can be pregnant with that person. Long Xiaoya only closed her mouth when she said this. She almost said what was in her heart. If she said it out, it would be so embarrassing. Which woman would want her mother to be pregnant with another man's flesh and blood? Even if this Guhan is dead, according to the rules of the maid center, as long as the maid has never been touched, she can re-enter the maid service center and find a new master. Your mother is the #1 in the maid school. The maid service center will not abandon your mother, Guhan said again. Why are you so clear about these things? I just found out about it. Long Xiaoya pouted. My mother said that Master Guhan treats her very well. She doesn't want to change masters anymore. She will be Guhan's maid for the rest of her life. Even if she dies, it's her fate. She won't blame anyone. Guhan sighed. Long Xiaoya didn't know him, so she probably wouldn't lie to him. She also wouldn't give up the benefits of saving her mother and not return to the maid service center. It seemed that this Wen Maiyun really recognized him as her master and was loyal to him. Forget it. Guhan originally wanted to save her. Now that he saw that she was so loyal to him, he was even more unwilling to let her die. When Guhan was about to order someone to take her to the hospital, suddenly, a stream of red seeped out from the bedsheet that was covered by the quilt. When Guhan saw it, his expression changed drastically. He directly lifted the quilt that covered Wen Meiyun's body. "What are you doing? What do you want to do to my mother, you pervert?" Long Xiaoya jumped up angrily and reached out to hit Guhan, but Guhan grabbed her hand. Just as she was about to break free, she heard Guhan say, "Don't waste time. Call the doctor over." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.